So, Berto, have you heard of Logan Paul of YouTube fame?
I've heard of a couple of Pauls of YouTube fame. I think they're brothers. Yes, I have.
Okay. What do you know about him?
I have very poor impressions of him from what I know. Is he the one that did the Japanese?
Yes.
Oh, God. And I might just be in the wrong demographic, but I feel like he does a lot of exploitative kind of content. And is he the one that got the house and he was like thrashing it and the neighbors were really unhappy, or was that his brother?
That's mostly his brother.
Oh, my gosh.
I mean, they both bought houses, but his brother is the one who's bothering the neighbors.
Is he the one that fought some other dude recently?
Yes.
Oh, my God. I have a lot of bad feelings about it.
I mean, it's a boxing match. It was
fair enough.
Actually, both the brothers fought brothers from the UK.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, like, a lot of my negative impressions are maybe because I just don't get it. But I will say that I watched some of his quote unquote apology content that he put out after the Japanese incident. And it felt pretty like he was just gaming the system to use it to actually re-propel himself even further. So yeah. I actually didn't feel like he was sorry for being insensitive or even offensive to Japan, that he was like sorry for being, like uncaring about the fact that these are real suicides and all that stuff. I didn't really feel like he felt that.
Yeah. So in this episode, I want to answer the question that is being asked on the internet a lot: is Logan Paul a psychopath? Mm-hmm. Lots of people are diagnosing him with sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial, and I want to weigh in on that.
Awesome. Diagnosed from afar. We do this a lot on this show.
Yeah. This is the Psychology in Seattle podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. And yeah, I also am not a fan of Logan Paul. Who are you, Berto?
My name is Humberto Castañeda, and I am a constant gardener.
So for me, I remember him from Vine. Do you remember him from Vine?
From what?
Vine,
No, I don't. I never even watched any Vines.
Well, there were...
so out of touch.
There were compilation Vine videos that
Is Vine like Snapchat?
Where someone would make a compilation, because I wouldn't want to go on Vine and watch 6-second clips, but YouTube would sometimes post like best of Vine.
I see.
And what I realized was there's a lot of kids, a lot of young people making very obnoxious so-called comedy videos on Vine. And Logan Paul was one of the big... But he was just one of many that was doing it. But he was one of the more memorable ones. He had a memorable haircut because he has that kind of weird, sweeping, blonde mess of a head. And but yeah, so I remember him from Vine about 10 years ago.
Is he the one that did the cover of No Handlebars or whatever?
Yeah.
Okay.
But that wasn't on Vine. That was on YouTube, I believe. Then I would occasionally hear him as a super rich YouTube star a few years ago.
Yeah.
You got your PewDiePies and you got
Logan Pauls.
You got your Logan Pauls. And I'm on YouTube a lot, but it would never suggest that I watch any of those videos. Right. And even if I came across one, I would never watch it. Just
pretty much everything I knew about Logan Paul mostly was from watching the Philip DeFranco show, because he would talk about whatever controversy was happening.
Yeah. And at the time, before the controversies, I just thought, well, he's for kids, he's one of those, like, I don't get why PewDiePie is popular either. And the dozens of other kid-oriented YouTube channels that are making billions of dollars. Yeah,
they need to get off our lawn is what they need to do.
I just look at it, I was just like, oh, okay, I guess that's what kids like these days. That's fine, not for me, obviously, because I'm a grown man that has, a more refined taste. I like, watching crotch shots on, fail videos. Then a year ago, everyone was talking about him, the incident of the Japanese forest. So you mentioned it.
Have you been there?
No. Okay. I was close, but I haven't. It's the north side of Mount Fuji, so it's kind of out of the way.
And it actually is a place where people go to commit suicide?
We don't use the word commit anymore. Complete is the preferred lingo, or kill yourself. The reason being is commit is associated with crime, like
I see.
Commit.
So this is a
sin.
place where people actually
kill themselves. So they stopped counting because they didn't want or they stopped publishing the number because they didn't want people going there to die.
The number. Oh.
Yeah, it's sort of random because there are lots of places one could die.
Yeah.
But when it's sort of like the Golden Gate Bridge, it's like once it becomes known as a place, then it just kind of plants that seed. And it's like, well, if other people are doing it, then I'll do it there.
Right.
You know? And so it's a public health problem because when people are given somewhat of a fast road to suicide, they're much more likely to act on it when they have that bump in motivation.
What about that forest made it? I
don't know.
Anything risky about the forest where you can die?
It's very serene. So I think maybe that, or it's associated with like, I don't know. It's a very serene forest area. So, but I couldn't tell you. People will hang themselves or even overdose on drugs. So, because it's kind of weird. It's like, if you're just going to overdose on drugs or even hang yourself, like you could hang yourself at home. Yep. But I think they do it because it's, it's sort of, serene. But it's also a little bit of a funny reputation because of all the suicides that happen in that area, very few of them happen in that forest. But it's just become, notorious for that. It's a regular forest where there's trails and, it's just a regular park, so to speak, national park probably. And occasionally someone will, they'll go off path and they'll be found, but probably one or two people on average a day will die in that forest.
Wow.
So it's
that's quite a lot.
It's a lot of people. Yeah.
Yikes.
Suicide in Japan is about twice the rate per capita than the United States.
That's incredible.
It is, but at the same time, it's still kind of rare. Instead of
0.01.
It's still pretty. People think, oh, Japan, they kill themselves all the time. It's like, no, it's suicide's pretty rare. It's twice the rate, but
Are there leading theories as to why?
Because their culture has a long history of promoting the idea that suicide is a very valid, not only honorable, but a valid way of dealing with your problems.
What do you call it? Seppuku? Seppuku?
Yeah, there's harikari. There are, the leaders and samurai of the old days, when they were disgraced, it was considered really your only option.
Right.
It was like, well, the only way you can save your honor is if you kill yourself. And if you killed yourself, you effectively did save your honor.
And your family is treated as such.
Right. Well, he did the honorable thing and he took his life, and that's a hard thing to do. And he did it in the ceremonial way. And and so, whereas the United States, like, we don't really hold that,
Right.
Like if, I don't know, if Nixon, for example, had killed himself, we wouldn't be like, well, he made up for it.
Right.
We just be like, he's a douchebag who killed himself. You know what I mean? Whereas in Japan, and mores are changing, suicide's becoming, it's seen differently as we move forward. And it's a very pluralistic society with lots of different ideas. But anyway, that's the reason why. And Japan tends to not be very cutting edge when it comes to mental health or talking about your feelings. And so there's a lot of really struggling people who feel like they don't really have any other avenues, But anyway, so he was in Japan. So, well, we'll get into the timeline in a second, but so I remember him a year ago, and I remember seeing all the hoopla about it and being a little curious about it, not really knowing that much about it. I remember I actually watched the video in question.
I didn't watch the video because I didn't actually want to see a dead person or whatever, but I did watch the clips of him being offensive in the video. And I sort of felt like the biggest problem was his racism on display in the video, even more so than him being disrespectful to the dead body. And I mean, from the perspective of like, well, the dead body was dead and it sucks for the family, but he's also being in general disrespectful to the whole culture.
Absolutely. Now, then over the past year, a lot of patrons have been emailing us, asking us to talk about him and weigh in, because there's a lot of talk on the internet as to, is Logan Paul is he a sociopath? And other internet celebrities have come out hard, and there's even a mini documentary made by another guy.
Yeah, one of the top
huge YouTubers.
What's his name?
I don't know, but he's been giant for a long time. He's like the other PewDiePie, essentially. But anyway, so caveat, as I always say, whenever we go into this sort of thing, I cannot diagnose from afar. Not only is it unethical, but it's
Shane Dawson.
Not only is it not ethical for me to diagnose from afar, but it's actually not possible. When we talk about sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, as with any personality disorder, I need 5 to 10 sessions with someone who is willing to talk with me and forthcoming with me in order to begin to understand someone's personality well enough to be able to make a call as to whether or not someone has a personality disorder. So there's no way I can say for sure.
So you're guaranteeing your diagnosis is what you're saying.
Yeah. And the only data I have is from the internet, and most of it is from his own channel, because there's not a lot of other sources of data that will give me reliable information about his behavior and personality outside of his own channel. So that's most of the data I have. And, that's not a substitute for 5 to 10 sessions at my office with a willing client.
Now, would it be okay if, say, Donald Trump diagnosed someone like Shane or whatever this guy is from afar?
Yeah. Having said that, long story short, given the data available to me and given his own statements about having sociopathic traits, which he actually talks about in a number of episodes, he's like, I have sociopathic traits. I would speculate that if I had a chance to fully assess his personality, I might find that he was about 10 to 20% on the spectrum of psychopathy or antisocial.
Yikes. What was I?
You are not on you're probably like a 3% on the psychopathic.
Oh no, it was the narcissism
Yeah,
thing.
you're like what did
Wasn't it like 12% or something?
No, Emily said you were 30, I think.
30?
Or 20.
What?
Well, I'm 5, so
I better be much higher than that. No, just kidding.
Maybe you were 15.
It was like 15%.
Yeah. To me, you're more like 10, but
yeah.
Anyway, so with Charles Manson being 100% psychopath, antisocial.
Wow.
But I would say he's actually more on the spectrum of narcissism. I would say he's about a 30% narcissism spectrum, which is double your narcissistic traits.
Double.
And if you want a full explanation of narcissism, become a patron of the podcast and get access to my 10 or 11 hour deep dive on narcissistic personality disorder.
Jeez, you must be full of yourself.
Go to patreon.com. It's not an untrue statement. Again, complete speculation about his personality, but given the data available, and again, given his own statements, I would say he's 10 to 20% spectrum psychopath and 30% spectrum narcissistic personality. The main data I have for psychopathy and antisocial spectrum is that, again, he admits to having psychopathic traits. That's a quote. He uses the phrase, I think it's psychopathic traits, he says. And what I think he's referring to, as he kind of explains, is that he doesn't care about rules. In his videos, it is very clear that he does not care about rules. He jumps on top of news vans. He yells at people on the street. In Japan, he's running around being really obnoxious. I mean, he's not breaking any laws per se, but, for example, if I dared you to jump on top of a TV news van,
right,
most of you would be like, no. And why would you say no to that?
Out of, a couple things. One, respect that it's someone else's news van.
Right.
But also, I'll get hurt.
Right. You could get in trouble. People could think bad things about you. Right. People who have antisocial psychopathic personality disorder, they tend not to care about that. Their biology or their learned behavior or whatever, their traumas, however they got there, is such that when you ask them to do something like that, they have fewer internal barriers to it.
Right.
You know, you ask you and me to jump on top of a TV news van, our bodies would physically resist it. You know, like our heart rate would go up.
Right.
We'd have stress hormones. We would be like, even if you gave me, I don't know how much, you know, like how much money would I have to pay you to jump on top of a van?
At least $2. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, I don't know, like a news van, like where am I jumping on this thing from?
Well, it's on the side of the street and there's a big crowd around and there's a TV
and I'm going to like climb up on top of it.
And people are filming you, the TV people.
Oh my gosh, it's going to get out.
Yeah.
Jeez, I don't think so. Like I need to retire after this. Like, give me $1 million or something.
Right. Yeah. It's a big threshold there, you know?
Yeah.
But to him, he did it, pretty easily.
Yeah.
Now you can make the argument that this is how he makes money.
Yeah.
He
does get $1 million.
He actually might have made $1 million from that video. But there are a lot of people where even if they were like, you know what, if I do this, I'm going to get content, I'm going to make money. A lot of people without psychopathic traits would be like, I still can't do that. There's just too much about that bothers me. Especially the content he made in Japan where he's like running up to polite Japanese people and just like screaming at them and just, you know, being really, really disrespectful and just a super douchebag, you know.
Is there some incidents with folks with these traits, higher incidents, for example, of shoplifting or casual theft kind of thing?
Yeah. And we'll get more into that in a second. But we don't have any evidence of that. And that's why I put him lower on the spectrum.
And the reason I asked that question is because I look at, like, if you're in a store and it's not a case where you know, either you desperately need food because your family's starving or anything like that, or you literally have kleptomania, like you just have this compulsion to take things or something. But you're sitting there and you're like, I like that. I'm just going to take it. There has to be some amount of like, I don't give a shit about neither the consequences, nor about the people who this belongs to, nor about this store, nor about, you know.
Well, maybe another way of looking at it is that let's say you are kind of hard up. Like you're 22 years old and you have a, you know, low paying minimum wage job and there's no way you're going to be able to afford a fashionable, semi-fashionable pair of jeans. Mm-hmm. And you go into the store and you're just like, man, those pants would, you know, I only have one pair of pants. These pants will actually get me some respect in the world. Like, I need those pair of pants. There are people who are not on the psychopathic spectrum who could not do it. And add on the factor of this is, you know, a major corporation like Target or something, where they have insurance for this sort of thing, and the garment probably cost them $3 to produce. So
you're not harming anyone that directly in the grand scheme of things.
But most people, given the way that we're raised, it is a physical reaction to breaking a rule. Like it's really hard to do for most people,
and partially because we know that it's not that it's a slippery slope, but it is a multiplicative effect if everyone starts choosing to just kind of ignore all the rules.
Yeah. It's also just something that we learn super ego-wise as we grow up. You know, when we're 2 or 3, we actually don't have that. We're perfectly fine just grabbing something from someone else and saying mine. But we learn through societal and cultural and parental guidance that there's certain behavior that is bad and there's certain behavior that is good. And we internalize that. And for people with psychopathic antisocial traits, they did not internalize that, or no one gave it to them, one, or their personality had developed or their disposition was such that they weren't available for internalizing that.
You know, one example that comes to mind is when I was growing up in Colombia in the 80s, the city of Bogota had an incredible trash problem. There was trash everywhere. There's garbage all over the streets, everywhere, just tons. And when you looked at people's behavior, people didn't have an internalized response to not throw things on the street. In fact, the common behavior was you finish that whatever you're eating, that wrapper goes on the street, and no one would correct. No one would say, "Hey, put that in a thing."
I love this example because if you said to an American, particularly in Seattle, this person has 95% of the time when they have garbage in their hand, and there's even a garbage can within 50 feet, they just throw it on the ground. You would say that person's a psychopath.
Yeah.
But it's all contextual.
It is, yeah.
So we have to take Logan Paul's context into consideration. We can't look at his behavior and say, he published a video of a suicide victim and giggled about it. If you just said that, you'd be like, wow, that sounds pretty bad. But he is a YouTube vlogger who needs to make a video every day, appealing to 8-year-olds who have a very different sense of humor than adults do, and a very different sense of morality and of taste than adults do. I mean, I was working as a therapist on 9/11 when the planes went into New York and Washington, D.C. and Pennsylvania. I was so afraid that day and so scared, demoralized, shocked. I mean, it was, even though I'm in Seattle, you know, one of the farthest points in the United States you can get away from it felt like, you know, terrorists are going to kill me and my family within any day now. Yeah. Like it just felt so, it was like, wait, what?
It felt like it could get to you.
They're everywhere. Yeah. Like if they're there, they're everywhere. They've been, you know, where else, you know, our borders are open, you know, people can, and da, da, da. So it was terrifying. And I know our borders aren't really open, but you get my meaning.
Red Dawn.
I go into a therapy session because I'm working with a family, and the kids are kind of gabbing at the beginning of the session, and they're like, oh, I wanted a plane to run into our school so we could have the day off, but lo and behold, I mean, I didn't say lo and behold, but of course, you know, the planes decide to hit New York instead of our school. I mean, come on.
Oh my God.
I wanted to strangle these kids. But this is normal.
Yeah.
Kids don't have the moral development. We know this. We've studied it, as adults do.
Right.
So when you are creating content for tweens and younger, which Logan Paul is, you're appealing to a different set of morals and a different set of sensibilities. Now, Logan Paul in the video didn't kill the guy because most of the kids probably wouldn't have liked that.
Yeah.
What he did was something extremely distasteful to an adult sensibility anyway. But again, you and me, you couldn't pay us enough money to make a video like that. Even if someone came along and said, look, 8 through 12-year-olds are going to watch this, you know, 100 times and share it 1,000 times, and you're going to get paid maybe literally $500,000.
Yeah, nope.
I'd be like, geez, that sounds like a lot of money, but no.
There are lines for everyone, and you know there are lines that we don't cross for a variety of reasons. And certainly, you know, when you're like, "Hey, if you push this button, we'll give you $1 billion, and 1 billion people will die." Yeah. Most human beings would never take that.
Yeah. The other context is not only was that the decision tree of like $500,000 if I do this and not $500,000 if I don't, is that he had been, since the age of 10, making content for the internet. Yeah. And he was 22 at the time. So, and it was getting more and more sensationalized. Yeah. And the train was sort of running off the tracks in various other ways at the time. So it wasn't like he woke up one day, like he was making cooking videos, and one day he decided to go into the suicide forest. Right. There was a very clear kind of slippery slope that he actually talks about, which I'll get into. But anyway, so the main data I have for his 10 to 20% psychopathy spectrum is that he admits to having it, and that he clearly has the ability, really, the rare ability to circumvent rules that most of us would just be like, nope, I don't care how much you pay me, you know?
Right.
But he probably doesn't qualify for the full-blown psychopathic personality disorder or antisocial personality disorder, because there's an absence of behavior that is found typically among people with full-blown disorders, which I'll get into in a second. And this is what the internet really gets wrong. I mean, the internet most people on the internet that I'm finding are like, oh yeah, he's absolutely a psychopath. He's absolutely a sociopath. And to me, it's like, one, you're not a clinician. How are you making such a claim? Right. Two, you really have no idea what a real psychopath or sociopath looks like. Just because you don't like someone doesn't mean they have a personality disorder. Right. Just because someone is doing something weird or distasteful to you or disrespectful does not mean they have a personality disorder. Personality disorders are really quite complex conditions. He literally gets paid to be obnoxious and to make these choices, and he is continuing to make money. Right. So as with Trump, when he does things, you can't necessarily tease out, like, is this what he's doing naturally, or is he doing this because he actually gets rewarded by millions of people for doing such a thing? It's hard to know. Right. Which I'll get into more of that data later. But anyway,
I wonder if one of the signs is when the behaviors continue even when the consequences are negative.
Right. Right. And repetitive negative consequences, which I'll get into in a second, which is people with actual psychopathy, actual antisocial, they shoot themselves in the foot all day long, every year of their life. Right. It's like a constant train wreck in their life. Like Logan Paul is a successful person. He adjusts, he tries to, you could argue he's not great at it, but I would argue he's not great at doing it in a way that appeals to 40 somethings. Yeah. He does it in a way that's very good for 10-year-olds.
Like I saw this little video clip the other day on YouTube where some dude is in a store with his girlfriend. Some other dude happens to be looking at the girlfriend's butt. And the dude turns around, notices that, and immediately goes up and punches the guy. And then the guy leaves, like kind of screaming at him. And the girlfriend's like, why did you do that? Please, sir, don't call the cops. And then it says, go apologize. And the guy's like, fine. Then he like walks out and apologizes. Now, I don't know if the guy's psychopathic or whatever, but clearly that's a guy who has got a lot of trouble controlling his reactions in the moment. Right. And that could easily landed him in jail. Right. So that's shooting yourself in the foot.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now, what about narcissistic personality spectrum? He is very comfortable being the center of attention. When you watch the videos and really it's a pervasive pattern because you go back to 10, maybe even before. I mean, imagine being 10 years old and going like, I'm going to be a YouTube star.
Right. So I mean, I do wonder if a lot of child stars in TV, movies, things like that, end up developing traits that are narcissistic. Well, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, because you get love and attention through that if you start too early in life. And you probably had them to begin with, which led you to that. Because you grab 100 10-year-olds, I would say 90 of them would be like, fuck no, I'm not going on YouTube. Like
they'd be scared.
They'd be terrified. Yeah. Or you'd put the camera on them and they just, climb even up. If they wanted to do this, so they wouldn't have the creativity. Right. At 10 years old, he was doing funny things. Like he was doing prank calls and stuff. And again, prank calls. Okay. So you're 10 years old. Right. You're making prank calls and filming it and putting it on YouTube. Oh, like when I was 10 years old, I would do or 8 or 7, I would do prank calls too. But it was so hard for me to do them. Right. And it was so viscerally scary that I probably prank called, I don't know, a handful of times. And I can actually remember 3 of those times as a kid. I wanted to do it, but most of me was, to him, it just looks like it's just another day for him. Right. So at the age of 10, he already, and they often do, have some psychopathic traits. I'll get into most of the traits of psychopathy he does not have, which we'll get into in a second. But anyway, getting back to narcissism, he was also a star wrestler and a star football player. So this is very common to people who develop narcissism as a way of coping with life and their family. When you are not given enough love and attention, you figure out, oh, if I'm the star, if I'm gregarious, if I get a lot of attention, if I'm good at things, then I will get love and attention. And so it just creates this feedback loop of reinforcing that behavior. You get better at it and You strive for it all the time. And so I don't have much data on that, but he fits a very common profile of someone with narcissistic personality traits, not the full-blown disorder, but with those traits. Like I said, I'm 5%. I was a star wrestler. I was a star football player. I was captain of the wrestling team. I was captain of the football team. I'm narcissistic just for mentioning that, by the way.
So you seek out some of that, like...
Yeah, you get... you learn that when you do those sorts of things, it fulfills a certain need and you become a little bit thirsty for it, and so you sort of orient your life in a narcissistic manner.
So I have a question about, there's an age in junior high, maybe high school, where some portion of kids seem really cruel to, like, really uncaring, but actually cruel to other kids. And that's, where they're doing like wedgies or I remember in Colombia, there was a time where one of the things they would do is they would grab a broom and slip it under your legs, and one guy would have the broom end on one side and the other guy would have the other one, and they would both lift at the same time. So the guy who they were doing this to would, if they don't put their hands down, it's gonna slam into their nuts.
Oh my God.
And they'd have to like jump up and like try to like, and it was like, why are you guys doing this? Or they would chase kids around to try to give them wedgies or stuff like that.
Yeah. Or talk crap about people or
right. And I never understood, like I always remember watching these behaviors and I'm like, why are they doing this? Like I could never get like, why do they think this is okay? But B, what are they getting out of doing this?
One, it's hard to know, but two, there are people who are oriented towards mean behavior as a way of asserting their self-esteem somehow. But also, again, as I said, moral development is a thing. Yeah. And when you're 13, even 17, you lack the full developed morality and sense of empathy for other people that you'll have.
Why did I watch that and be like, I know that's wrong?
It's a good question. There's some people develop differently. Maybe your friends weren't really like that, and so you weren't indoctrinated into that sort of culture.
And I know my dad definitely imbued from as early as I can remember a sense of right and wrong and like just social justice and things like that.
Yeah.
So like I was talking about the littering, like from the moment I can remember, my dad would always be like, pick that up and he would explain why and all these kinds of things.
Yeah. I suspect that in a certain light, you would see the immorality and be disgusted or turned off. But in other ways, you completely lacked morals at that age, So it wasn't like your base level morality was more advanced than other kids. I would speculate. Of course, it's a philosophical discussion. Sure. But I would say that your parents just really taught you well in that way.
And some types of behaviors would ring out, but others I might not notice.
Right.
Yeah. Well, certainly, because, for example, I preferred lying to my dad when I would get in trouble other than face the consequences. And clearly that was not the right moral choice.
Right. Other things regarding his narcissism is he even talks about in his videos that he's, especially this past year, because he's become more self-disclosing about his personality after the Japanese incident. He talks about how he's super concerned about people liking him. And after the Japan video created a big backlash, he talks about being devastated that people didn't like him. And he admits to having a tremendous drive to make people like him. And it's clear that he's like this every day, all day long.
Oh, okay.
Because he makes these videos, every day, all day long. He needs that narcissistic supply, and there's a supply waiting to be given to him, Now, you could argue that every artist who creates anything is trying to get narcissistic supply, which you could make a valid argument for. So it's not like he's any different from any other artist.
Sure.
But he, seems particularly driven, shall we say, to meet his narcissistic supply.
But I did notice that at the time he put out, so he went dark for maybe, I don't know, a couple weeks or something like that.
Yeah.
And then he put out this video that was sort of like an apology / paying paying socially for what he did. But that one I did watch, and I also saw some commentary on it. And my feeling of it was that he was figuring out what check boxes he needed to check in order to like kind of move past this thing.
Yeah, I agree. There were a number of apology videos or discussions that came out over the past year. And the first one was, it's just hard to know exactly what's going on in his soul.
Yeah.
Because imagine you have millions of followers.
Right.
And you're 22 years old and you're kind of immature to begin with, you know? He's like a young 22, right? He's probably like a 16-year-old version of a 22-year-old, you know? Because his adolescentness has been rewarded by the world, you know? Right. So imagine you or me at the age of 22 you're sitting there going, crap, I've got to salvage my career.
Right.
I've got to come out with a video that feels spontaneous.
Yeah.
And feels sincere and looks good to 8-year-olds and 42-year-olds.
Right.
I've got to, how do I write? Because you have to essentially write something, or at least figure out how you're going to improv it. You have to figure out the vibe that you're going to do it, because it's going to be unnatural. Because if you just walked up to him, you know, a week later and been like, how do you feel about it? He would be natural. He would express this, and you could have a conversation over the span of a couple hours or a few days or something. But he knows he's got to make a video that spans 10 minutes or 20 minutes or something. And he's got to think about how his hair looks and what's the background going to like, what's the lighting, what's the sound. You know, this is a production. And imagine you're 22 and you have no guidance. You're just a dude with a few friends who don't know much about this sort of thing. You've been flying by the seat of your pants your entire career so far. That's a tall order. He's not a writer. He's not a content provider.
You're a kid at that point.
Yeah, he's not a content provider that's sincere. He's a content provider of goofiness. Yeah. And so the fact that the video came out a little weird is not a surprise.
That's totally fair. Yeah. I guess in my mind, here's some comparison examples. Imagine there's a comedian that is on stage and says a joke about how, you know, all women are dumb and inferior to men. Okay.
Take Seinfeld guy.
Yeah, Kramer.
Yeah.
About, I forget what it was, but it's some racist rant.
Yeah, black people, yeah.
So on the one part, him coming out and saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry." It's like
Michael Richards.
It's like, well, okay, I get that you're sorry that negative consequences happen to you, but that is how you feel, isn't it? And I don't think that overnight you all of a sudden don't feel that way, right? And you can do that with a lot of people, that when they do certain things, they might be sorry because their hand got slapped, and they might even grow from this. But there's no way that they didn't actually feel, at least to a significant percentage, that way, and that's why they said what they said. Especially if it's not a comedian, right? Like if you're talking about a politician that comes out and there's some recording of them like saying something really bad, and then the next day it's like, well, I'm sorry if anyone was offended. It's like, no, you're just saying whatever. You're checking boxes to see if you can move past this. You still feel the same way as you felt yesterday. I felt that way a bit about this thing, because the things he said on the video that were offensive, and I don't remember now, but it was pretty offensive. It was an offensive video about towards the Japanese people. I was like, I get that you're a kid, but you didn't just change your mind about how you felt about this. It's just that your hand got slapped.
Right. And I expect nothing else. It's not like he had a therapist to talk to or any guidance. And he's a child, basically, and it's hard for him to understand. So, what you're implying or saying is the only thing that would have satisfied you if he would have come out and did this super real video and just be like, you know what? I made this video and I didn't realize it was going to bother anybody. And it makes me think there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with my personality or something. I don't get it. So I could apologize, and I do. I'm sorry, because everyone hates me now, but honestly, I can't tell you why everyone hates it. Because when I put it out, like that would have been the only.
That's very sophisticated.
That would have been the only response.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't have gone over well.
No, nor would it have come out of someone at his age and his position. And
right.
Yeah.
Because what he thinks is, well, this is a career move, and like a politician, like, a comedian, these are well thought out career moves. Yeah. Like when Starbucks gives a bunch of trainings about, diversity and inclusion and publicizes that event well. Is Starbucks doing that because they truly care about diversity, or is Starbucks doing it because it's a good marketing move? It's both.
Yeah.
Or it's definitely a marketing move. You can't do anything in business without thinking about, or at least if you're smart enough, the optics of it.
Yeah.
So if he has any smarts, which he does, because he's among the literal millions of other kids who have tried to do what he has done, he is one of a handful of people who has succeeded.
Yeah.
If he's smart enough, which he is, he thought about the optics of what this is, but he is not a professional apologizer. He's a 22-year-old goofball, like I said. And so the fact now, subsequent videos have come out where he's talked about it more and more.
Okay.
And each video that I watched, I saw iterative maturity. He's now he's 23.
Yeah.
So he's not like he's massively more mature than he was a year ago, but I see growth in him. He still has a long way to go. Now, I have treated people his age, and I would not expect them to be at the maturity level, at the empathy level, at the wisdom level that they're going to be when they're 45 or 65.
Absolutely. And the thing that I'm realizing as we're going through this is, when in history did a 21-year-old have a forum that wasn't pre-scripted for them to come out and say whatever the hell they wanted that had as much reach immediately?
Yeah.
Because the closest would have been in some late night talk show, someone said something a little off that garnered some negative press for them, right?
Or a child or a young actor that was on a hit show like The Cosby Show did something untoward when they were at a restaurant or something.
Right.
But that wouldn't have had the reach.
Right. But this is someone with no director, no script writer, no nothing. It's their own show, their own decisions, with only other kids around them.
Yeah. And yes kids, by the way.
Yes kids. But saying things that immediately go out to millions of people.
Yeah. And
that's unprecedented. And
he did the Vine thing, and he did the YouTube thing, then he did the Vine thing.
Yeah.
And the Vines were, 6 seconds. So it's not him editorializing. Right. It's him jumping off of a garbage can and hurting himself. Then he goes on YouTube and he starts making these comedy videos. Yeah. Then about 2 years ago or a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, he makes this move of like, well, if I'm going to take this to the next level, I'm going to do a daily blog. I'm going to do a vlog. So I have to create content every day.
Yeah.
So that's really going to stretch your creative limits.
And you're trying to one up yourself.
And yeah, you have to constantly do new things. It's probably what Logan Paul thinks about from the minute he wakes up until the minute he goes to bed, which is, how can I keep this content train rolling?
Right.
Because if I can't, I will lose money.
Well, and then there's this thing where, imagine how many things that we did or said when we were young, if they were on video and shown to millions of people, that we would at least have to severely apologize for, and could be ruinous to our career.
I kind of have that, not published, but I had a video camera when I was 22.
Right.
And I wouldn't want a second of that to be available online. Right. And yeah, I would have made, every other minute I would have had some gaffe.
Like, for example, me and my friends in high school, we made this little video that at the time, Cops was a big show on TV.
Oh God.
And we made one called Minority Cops in Tacoma. Now, we were all minorities, right? Like me, most of my friends were Asian, I was Latino, all these things. But in that video, we made all sorts of stereotypes on purpose and all these things.
Yeah.
And some very sexually offensive and suggestive things. Oh my God, I don't want that video seen by anyone.
Right.
You know, and we were teenagers.
Yeah. And so it's not surprising is the thing. Now, having said all that, if you or us want to hate him, you can. If you want to think he is a menace to society, you can. If you want YouTube to shut him down, you can say that. If you want the government to pass a law against Logan Paul, you can petition for that. If you think that he is corrupting the minds of the youth of America right now, you can say that. You can do all of those things and still not diagnose him with a personality disorder.
Right.
Just because you hate him and you think he's a menace does not mean that makes him qualify for a clinical diagnosis that most people don't understand. Right. So I just want to say,
I will also say that when I think back in my life about times I've had to apologize or that I've apologized for things, I definitely can distinguish that there were times and many times where I was sort of, and I'm going to use the word loosely here, but I was sort of psychopathically apologizing, meaning I was going through the motions in my mind and very consciously picking words and saying like, literally, how can I get through this to the greatest benefit for me? Whereas there were times where I was like just honestly humbled and I was sitting there going, oh my God, I have totally messed up.
And I would assume that the latter reaction is more prevalent as you aged.
Yep, absolutely.
You got more mature, more empathy.
Yep.
You had more experiences and cataloged them as being harmed. And when you harmed someone else, you're like, ooh, I know what that feels like.
Yeah.
When you're 22, you have not cataloged those things. You haven't internalized those things. Right. And especially if you haven't been taught, because I don't think his family is quite the best healthy environment. But anyway, let's take a break and then let's really go through the criteria for psychopathy and antisocial. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. How would Logan Paul petition his listeners to become patrons? What would he do?
Something like fireworks go off in the background. He bungee jumps down from someone else's helicopter that he doesn't own or rent it because he stole it. And he shaved his head off. It's like he shaved his famous hair off.
Oh, I don't think he'd ever do that.
But he has. That's just it.
Oh.
And he's going like, patronize me or else you're dead or something. I just hurt my voice doing that.
Yeah. So become a patron of the podcast and you get access to hundreds of patron exclusive episodes. Like I said, the 11-hour deep dive on narcissistic personality, other deep dives on other personality disorders like passive aggressive, histrionic, borderline, these kinds of things, and many other topics. Anyway,
if you sign up to be a patron, I will jump on a news van for 10 hours straight.
Yeah. In your mind.
In someone's mind.
Okay, so I've already gone over some of his backstory here, but also want to just kind of fully flesh out what I observed on his channel in the past 48 hours of doing a deep dive on him. So over the past couple of years, he's been doing skits. They'll do like they'll act out little skits. They'll do these stunts like the bicycle thing.
Right.
Where, essentially what I imagine it was, he woke up in the morning, but wouldn't it be funny if we hired women actresses to be a bicycle and then I rode them, and it became across as misogynistic because guess what? He's a white, blonde, blue-eyed kid from Ohio who probably doesn't really understand the politics of feminism and of oppression of women, or might even think it's sort of funny at the time or something, as a lot of 22-year-old douchebags will. Right. He does celebrity stuff like he'll like Kim Kardashian stuff, like he gets into an exclusive club or he's on stage or because he's massively famous.
He's huge.
Yeah, I mean he can show up to a live event and there will be tens of thousands of kids just like blocking the streets. Like he could just be like, I'm going to be at the Fifth Avenue Theater outside on this time, and the entire, several blocks will just be completely cut off from the congestion of young children being there. He'll meet celebrities, like he met Stan Lee, and he talks to a lot of people like that. He likes to jump off of things, like lots of stunts.
That's his thing, jumping off?
A fair amount. He actually jumped, or he was trying to do a dance on a table in a mall, I think, and trying to evade the security guards or something. And he fell on a chair on his nuts. And he went to the hospital a few days later. This is all reportedly from him. And they had to, I think, do surgery. And he claims that he's missing 15% of one testicle, which sounds like a weird thing to have happen. But anyway, he has a lot of, he does a lot of things, sort of jackassy kind of stuff. He likes to show off, like buying things. Like he has this big home in LA. He has Rolex watches, and he has
like cribs kind of thing,
Lamborghinis, and there's a lot of unboxing of things. He does a lot of just like super, even when he's just sort of mildly talking to the camera, he is screaming and running around. Like he'll just be talking about the most inane thing, but he's just like,
so his energy level is super high.
Yeah. Cause again, that's what 8-year-olds are looking for, He started his own clothing line. He'll give advice sometimes. Like this is when he's not screaming at the camera, sort of don't give up kind of videos. He's recorded his own music, hip hop, rappy stuff, and he'll do videos for that. In fact, his most famous or most watched videos, from my notice, was his music videos.
He's like very buff too, or like in good shape or something.
Yeah, he's a buff guy. Presumably works out a lot. He does product placement. Like he did a famous one about color blindness glasses. Did you hear that one?
For real? Like,
yeah, like,
really?
I don't know if it was a product placement, but it's sort of a famous Logan Paul,
I didn't know.
Sort of embarrassing thing that he did, in that he suffers from some color blindness, and he put on the color blindness glasses and he looked at a sunset and he like started to cry. Oh, but it was so clearly fake crying or pushed out crying.
Oh yeah. Why would color blindness with, because I've seen those real stories of people that could, like a baby that could hear the mom for the first time.
Right. It's sort of
someone
like
that had an operation and could like see color and stuff like that.
Right. It's like that. And I'm sure he was aware of that trope.
I see.
And was trying to pull on those strings.
That's extreme. Like,
well, you have to watch it. Again, he's great at jumping off of things and ruining his testicles. Like, he's very good at that. He's not so great when it comes to these other avenues that he's got, like trying to apologize or trying to create like a crying moment, And by the way, I've looked into these color blindness classes. I don't have color blindness, but I've looked into the science on it, and it doesn't cure your color blindness. It just brings out certain colors that, you might, anyone puts on tinted glasses, you're going to see the world slightly differently. And there's some, the glasses kind of work, but not really anyway.
Because isn't the point to help you distinguish the colors so that you don't think?
I think that's what the technology is. It just helps you to say like, oh, green is a slightly different shade than the red, but you're not actually seeing red or green.
Right.
It just but it actually will cancel out other colors in the process, anyway. He does pranks, like he filled his brother's pool with slime. That episode is really stupid because the episode starts off like prank, fill my brother Jake Paul pool with slime. And I'm thinking, wow, that's actually kind of funny. Like, to imagine trying to clean that out. You'd have to, I don't know, get a bulldozer or something. So they got all this slime powder and they just dumped it into the pool. And I'm waiting for the slime to be created, but it just turned the water green.
Oh.
So then Jake Paul comes out and he's like completely freaking out. He's like, what did you do? Whoa. And everyone's like, this is so funny.
It's a prank.
And I'm like, one, it's not slime.
Right.
Two, it's just green, and it's not even deep green. It's just sort of a tint. Like they didn't have enough of the powder. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's the kind, but again, if you're 8 years old, it's hilarious, because you believe stuff like that. millions of views for each video. Millions,
Right.
like he'll have videos with, I don't know, 100 million views or something, or,
It's crazy.
I think his typical video will get, I don't know, 500,000 views or so. He probably makes about $10 to $20 million per year just from YouTube alone. God knows what he's making from product placement and his own clothing line and all.
Insane.
Yeah. But guess what? He is not in the top 50 channels on YouTube, which was surprising to me.
That is very surprising.
I looked up at the top 50 channels on YouTube. Guess what the top YouTube channels are?
So there's one that's this kid unboxing toys, right? Or unboxing and playing with toys.
I didn't see that one.
He's like, they make millions of dollars a month.
I don't doubt that, but I don't think that one's the top 50.
There's Shane Dawson is huge.
I think Shane Dawson
PewDiePie is huge.
PewDiePie is number one.
Number one still?
I think so.
Okay.
Which is also odd to me. I mean, I get why gamers would want to watch him play games, but there's a lot of dudes who play games in an interesting fashion.
And then there's a lot of females that do like makeup.
None of those. So the big ones are Bieber. Only half of them are in English. There's this big one, Herman or something, Spanish. There's big ones in Brazil. I think the second most popular one was a Brazilian or a Portuguese channel or something. Hindi channel. There's a Hindi channel up in the top 3. There are Katy Perry's channel, Ed Sheeran's channel, things like that.
Weird.
And because I would have thought it was PewDiePie and Logan Paul, but PewDiePie is, but Logan Paul isn't. Anyway. Watching all of his videos over the past 48 hours, I have to say, has scrambled my brain partially. I mean, I after a few hours of it, I started to feel sort of sick to my stomach. There's something, even though I wasn't intellectually bothered by him. I was like, oh, this is what kids like to watch these days. That's fine. But there's something about the tone or the pace or the inane sort of content that I felt dumber after watching it. You know what I mean? Like it actually sort of affected my biology.
Right. Well, there was a channel I used to watch when it was out. He stopped making videos, or at least that kind of video. I'm trying to remember what the hell it was called, but it was this guy that would talk about stuff in the mainstream media, like pop news and things like that. But it was so annoying because he would talk super fast and everything was chopped really fast, right? Edited really tightly. But for some reason I found myself watching it almost daily, and for a while he was the number one.
Who are you talking? Are you talking about H3? Oh, man. H3N3, that guy?
Yes.
Yeah.
What was that called?
I forget his name, but yeah, he in the early or late aughts, he had the top channel.
That was the one.
Yeah.
Anyways,
he was infinitely better than Logan Paul, though.
Right, but I couldn't understand why I kept watching it, because it actually was weird.
Oh.
But you're right. It was still more entertaining. But there was something about it that the more I watched it, I felt worse about myself for watching it.
Well, man, if you watch Logan Paul, it's going to be bad. Because I kept thinking, oh, well, he's a YouTube genius, so this stuff has got to, some of it's got to be kind of entertaining.
Right.
I didn't find a single there was one moment where I was entertained where he is, I won't explain the details, but he does this little reaction that I thought was kind of funny. I was like, oh, that was kind of funny. But like the slime in the pool thing.
Yeah.
Is a good example, because it's like, oh, at least this is going to pay off with slime in the pool. But even those videos, it doesn't even pay off. Like many of his videos, he'll start with a premise, like, I'm going to fill a bus with a bunch of balls, like those playpen balls. And you're thinking, oh, this must pay off somehow. They must prank someone in a funny way or get pulled over by the cops, or, there's got to be some punchline.
Right.
But there isn't. It's just like they fill a bus with a bunch of these plastic balls. He jumps around in it, and it's, mildly interesting.
That's so weird.
And then they try to create a punchline, and then the video just ends. But the way that they're acting, it's like the most amazing thing that's ever happened.
So that's the punchline, is them pretending it's the punchline.
And again, when you're 10, it is the most amazing thing, because you're like, when you're 10, that's entertainment,
Like, oh my God, a bus full of
Yeah, you go to school the next day and go, did you see
that? He
filled an entire bus with plastic balls. Isn't that hilarious? And to people like you and me, we're like, what? So, that's also why it kind of scrambled my brain, because I was like, they're frantic and seemingly happy, and they seem to be entertained with themselves, but I am so bored right now. Like,
well,
it was a combination of being overly stimulated and extremely bored.
It's like if you try to watch the old He-Man cartoon.
Yeah.
Actually, you might have been too old to even enjoy it at the time.
I loved He-Man.
Because I loved it.
Yeah.
But I try to watch an episode these days of the old cartoon, and I'm like, this is so inane.
Yeah.
But, at the time.
But when you're 10, it's the almost, we love the A-Team.
Yeah.
And, I remember maybe with the A-Team, or, maybe Battlestar Galactica in the 80s, I remember watching it, and I was the only one in my house who watched it. Mm-hmm. Normally, it's my whole family. We'd all watch Laverne and Shirley. We'd all watch Love Boat. We'd all watch, those kinds of shows. And I couldn't understand why no one liked the A-Team.
Yeah, don't you guys want to watch? The A-Team is on.
Yeah. And it's because, my older brother and sister were 7 years older than me, and they looked at it and said, that's dumb. And my parents certainly looked at it and said, that's pretty dumb.
I had the same reaction with my dad on a lot of those shows, where I'd be like, and he'd sit down and watch it with me just to do it. But I didn't realize that. I thought he's enjoying it as much as I am. And I'm like, wasn't that a great episode? He's like, yeah. Or I remember when I went to, that's right. I went to the movie theater and we watched, it must have been Love, but it's over now. No, I know. I fell into that one. I forget what movie it was, but it was an 80s movie, right? Where we watch it and we come out of it and I'm just, oh my God, that was amazing. What did you think? And I remember my dad being so underwhelmed, but he didn't want to fully. So he's like, oh yeah, that was pretty good. And I'm like, what do you mean pretty good? That was the greatest thing ever.
Right. Yeah. I've seen that in kids when I go to movies with kids now. Right. I saw Battleship. You probably haven't seen it. It's awful. Okay. It's based on the game.
No way. They made a movie about the Battleship game?
Yeah, but it's aliens have ships, and you fight actual U.S. Navy ships.
I see.
And it's long and so dumb. It is so dumb. It's like, how did you write this thing? And I went with, people that were kids, and I was just like, I can't believe what is happening. Walked out of the movie theater, and I'm like waiting for everyone to be like, well, that was terrible, pretty dumb. Right? And the kids were going crazy. Yeah. Like, oh my God, that was so awesome. Remember when that happened and that happened? And I'm like, oh, I get it. Like, we have completely different tastes. Now, when I was your age, I probably would have loved it.
Right.
And that's why I think a lot of Star Wars fans don't like Episode 8. Because Episode 8 is geared towards our age. Yeah. Nuance and disappointment and guilt. And, whereas when we were kids, we loved seeing Luke triumph. You know what I mean?
Well, and I think that's why Return of the Jedi had such different reactions between your age group and my age group. So I was just young enough to not only not be bothered by the Ewoks, but actually think they were kind of cute.
No, I was 13, so I wasn't old. I wasn't too old.
Okay.
It's just as an older person, when I would look back and I would hear people criticize episodes 1 through 3 for being too childish, I was like, do you remember the Ewoks?
Well, but I see, because I've had conversations with people that at the time didn't. They were like, oh, that's too cutesy.
Oh,
but
no.
When Return came out, to me, it was definitely on the same level as the other ones.
And in a lot of ways it is. I mean, episode 4 and 5 also have, when the Minox, I mean, that was a pretty dumb episode.
But I have to say, like, on retrospect now, like, looking at it, I'm like, the whole Ewok thing was a little over the top, cutesy, and that whole battle was sort of silly and blah, blah. Whereas in Empire, the moments are there, but there are fewer of them. But so I can see if you were older at the time, maybe significantly older, like maybe a teen or in your 20s, maybe when you saw Return, it was significantly younger feeling than Empire.
Maybe like my older brother might have felt that way. Yeah. So after the Japanese forest video, there's some data about how he reacted. So he can't, he went dark, and actually YouTube cut him off for a couple weeks, by the way, of revenue. Which could have been like $1 million or something, who knows, but just a couple of weeks, because YouTube loses money too when they cut off his revenue. So they, that's actually interesting to think about. If, Logan Paul makes $10 million a year from his own channel, Google has got to make like, what, 50 grand a year? Because they don't give half the revenue to the creators, right?
Right. One note about that, including the way that any of these big companies react to things. Partially, it's sort of like their hands are tied because there's so much litigation and they got to be so aware of like lawsuits and all these things, right? But it would be interesting if when something weird like that happens on any of these platforms, if the company took more steps to like educate the creators and the audience more. Do you know what I mean? Like here's a case where it's not entirely young creators' faults that they don't know what the hell they're doing with these new tools, right? So these companies could take more ownership on helping the young creators in general, but certainly young creators, understand a little bit more about the impact they have, the great responsibility, great power, blah, blah, and also educate the audience a little bit more. Because I feel like a lot of times the responses are like, this does not represent our values, so we're penalizing this creator, as if we're all just like aware of this new world that we're living in and everyone's aware of the pluses and minuses, but none of us are.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, it must have crossed Google's mind at some point to provide some consulting, or some communication.
Yeah.
And there must be a reason why they don't. I mean, my guess, if I was to speculate, would be that the creator could make that conversation public and embarrass Google. You know what I mean?
I mean, even not make it private, but in fact, post public.
But do you know what I mean? Like, that would be a tough tone to hit well, so imagine, Google outward facing marketing person says, okay, you have a team, write a script, hire an actor, and we'll create a 5-minute response to what Logan Paul did in the Japanese suicide forest. And by the way, suicide forest is an offensive term. I'm using quotes in that. It has a specific name, and you wouldn't call the Golden Gate Bridge the suicide bridge. You know what I mean? Anyway, so imagine that they did that and they came out with something that would be a tall order to hit the tone right, because it could come across as like Google trying to save their ass. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like Google's only interested in the bottom line.
So let me see if I can give an example of what I'm trying to get at. Imagine that some company creates a new kind of squirt gun, and this squirt gun shoots the furthest range of any squirt gun ever. And so, kids all over, they're just so into the squirt gun. But it turns out that many of them end up like using the squirt gun to squirt into eyes, and it hurts people's eyes, right? So there are at least two main types of responses that you could imagine the company coming out with. One of them would be, hey, we have a warning on the package, and we publicly disavow anyone trying to squirt this in people's eyes, so we've covered our asses. Another type of response would be like, oh, I see. We created this thing, and it is being used by our target demographic in ways that leads to harm. So let's actually do more. Let's, first of all, like maybe change the product a little bit. Maybe also include visual guides and have commercials with kids using it properly, or I don't know, et cetera, right?
But that is not, that illuminates your thought process, but that, and probably the situation for Google, but it's not the correct analogy, because what you're describing is the Logan Paul correction, because Logan Paul is in charge of the product in the same way that the toy company is in charge. What the analogy to this is that it'd be as if like the government or the FCC or the Better Business Bureau came out and had some explanation for the, because I think that's how Google considers themselves. They don't consider them, and they probably have thought about this. They're probably like, look, if we come out and say some kind of apology or some kind of like explanation or publicly, then we are basically claiming ownership over actual messages on YouTube, which we do not want people to, because we want YouTube to be a place where, you know, for the most part, people can, you know, within certain limits, can pretty much do a lot of different things. And so we don't want them to associate that with us. We want them to associate the platform with us, but not the content with us.
But this is exactly why I picked that analogy, because I think of it as you've created a water gun. YouTube or Twitter or Facebook is a water gun. What you do with a water gun, you could just sit in your room shooting at the wall, or you could have some friends and you make sure you only shoot at the feet. You could not even shoot at each other, whatever. I just created a water gun. But the fact of the matter is that you are targeting it to people that are going to use it in ways that lead to damage.
Okay, I get it.
Yeah.
And I think Zuckerberg is toying with this notion.
Right.
I'm sure Google is, I mean, Google will only toy with this notion if people start blaming Google, which I think people are kind of starting to do.
Well, they've certainly had a lot of backlashes with advertisers pulling out for many, you know, I don't know if you heard of the whole adpocalypse thing where, because ads were being served in videos that were offensive. So example, some extreme right-wing thing would take out ads promoting, even like promoting some white supremacy things or other things like that. And these ads would show up on videos for companies, right? And things like that. Or the flip side, there are creators creating super offensive content, and companies, normal companies like Dove or whatever, would have their ads show up before or after these videos. So then they're like, whoa, that's not what we signed up for, because now people are associating our brand with these super offensive things. And so a whole bunch of companies pulled out.
Right. Like the entire video is about purity and washing the earth clean of brown people, and this Dove ad comes on. Right. So I think that I agree with you that I think this is something that these platforms have to think about. You know, it's tough though, because I have a libertarian streak that's just like, look, you know, Facebook, it's a company, and you know they're making profit, and if you don't want to use Facebook, then don't use Facebook. Or if you use it, you need to know that there are algorithms, and they're, you know, people are trying to make money off of you, and you just have to keep that in mind.
But the problem is people don't know that.
But so I'm a libertarian, so So I have that side of me of just like, that should be the way. On the other hand, it's like, I'm also, you know, a socialist communist sort of person that believes in social engineering if it's done well and has good goals, like banning straws and plastics and, you know, and taxing gas, you know, these are anti-libertarian notions. And if they're done well enough, you know, I think it is for the greater good, you know. Like, for example, in Washington State, in the maybe 1989 or something, they made it illegal to drive a car in Washington State without having a seatbelt. Yeah. I grew up in the 70s and 80s when there was no law about seatbelts, and the car didn't make a noise when you didn't have a seatbelt on, and no one wore seatbelts.
Right.
Like, nobody wore a seatbelt. For the first, 2 or 3 years of me driving a car, I probably never wore a seatbelt.
Right.
Because it was just not I'm not going to get in a car accident. You know, I don't plan on getting in a car accident. And if I thought back on my life, I've been, driving for 31 years now. I've probably never needed the seatbelt to be on. I don't think I've ever gotten it. I've been in a number of accidents, but they were very low miles per hour, Anyway, and by the way, none of them were my fault. There was a span of like 4 or 5 years where I got hit, no joke, 10 or 15 times while my car was stopped.
Oh my God.
Like I'd be at a stoplight and the car behind me would just ram into me.
That's crazy.
Or I'd be one time I was sitting in my car with a friend. And I'm in the parking lot and the car next to me backed up and hit me.
Oh my God.
And like ripped my back bumper off of the car.
Oh my God.
Anyway, my point is that social engineering by government can be good. And even though I was initially annoyed with that law because I'm like, why do I have, let me make the choice. I think overall it's a good thing. And so now I'm not talking about government control over Facebook or Google in this fashion. I think privacy issues, the government has to fucking slam these people because people are they're invaded in ways they have no idea. By the way, I actually downloaded my Facebook information recently, and actually most of it was fine. Because I don't like a lot of things I don't like a lot of products. And it has to be categorized as something like a progressive adult male who is interested in expanding his life, or I can't remember the phrase, but I'm like, okay, fine. I
downloaded mine too, and it wasn't that surprising.
Yeah, none of it was. They didn't know where, because I don't have my location services on, so it didn't know where I was. Everything was. Right. I was like, oh yeah, I'm surprised they don't have more on me.
Right.
Because if they really wanted to, they could probably, So anyway,
so part of the thing is, we've talked about this theme before. We like to pretend that things are as they used to be so that we can count on the lessons we know from history and from our own past to help us in the future. For example, when it comes to global warming, I think that's one of the problems we're running into so much is that people just assume things will work out because you know what? We've had problems in the past with this, that, or the other thing, and somehow we always figure something out, right? And so the assumption is
some of the time, right? And I'm arguing with this hypothetical person. Some of the times it's because of massive government oversight.
Right. But in general, I think what happens,
like antitrust or making the cigarette companies, report honest science.
Right. But what happens is us humans, like all animals, most animals, anyways. Our evolution has not given us tools for dealing well with rapid change. So when all of a sudden the climate changes from our normal everyday weather to 30 minus, if we haven't already developed technology to deal with that, we die off. When all of a sudden our food supplies go away, if we don't have ways to account for that already in our tech tree, we die off. This happens to animals all the time. It certainly happens to humans in extremes. And not only that, we are terrible at predicting trends that aren't like immediately linear, So we're sitting here going, oh yeah, these new tools, Facebook, Twitter, blah, blah, blah. That's just like what I had when I was a kid, just different. No, none of this stuff is like what any humans have had in any time in history, right? Never in the millions of years of like apes like us has there been the ability to type something in a little device and instantly it be available to millions of other apes, right? And let alone have that be then...
And the reverse, to post something on the internet and have literally millions of people comment.
Right.
And express
Everyone give their opinions.
Yeah.
That's never happened.
No.
So we don't know how this works.
And anonymously at that.
Right. In some ways, we've gotten sort of lucky that we are adaptable beings, but these are uncharted territories. And so when someone makes a new tool that allows people to express creatively and all these things, it's fantastic. But it clearly comes with some side effects that we did not predict.
Yeah.
Like a 20-year-old being able to do whatever they want and have it be public immediately to millions.
Right. And the argument that actually I don't hear a lot of people talking about is Logan Paul and other people like him harming children, with their influence? I would argue probably not, given what I know about Logan Paul's content. If I was a parent of a 8-year-old, I would probably not very much want them to watch it. But at the same time, I'd be like, I don't know, there's a lot of inane stuff on the internet as long as, kids understand there's a line between good and bad behavior.
Yeah.
Like Looney Tunes, you're supposed to identify with Bugs Bunny.
Right.
He did a lot of really horrible, rebellious things, or Roadrunner, for example. Like kids in general understand the difference between entertainment and reality.
Well, and there's a big difference between this, and I think we talked about this before, but I'm assuming you heard about all the scandal with the YouTube content that was being engineered for kids, but it was completely like mind fucks, essentially.
No.
Okay, so this happened about a year ago.
After this, we got to get back to Logan Paul.
Totally. About a year ago, this happened where, and it's still a mystery, by the way, why this was happening and who was creating all this content. So all of a sudden, some reporters noticed that there was all this strange YouTube content that was being created, that was being shown to kids. And what I mean showing to kids is that it was showing in kids' feeds explicitly. All the keywords, all the themes, the topics were all for kids. Things like it had content from Frozen and Disney and all these kinds of things.
Oh, okay.
But the videos themselves were super disturbing. It had stuff like Spider-Man spanking Elsa and weird adult-child interactions that were totally not approved. Like really weird stuff. And no one knew where the hell. So YouTube went ahead and banned a ton of this content and added all new sort of safeguards and stuff like that. But it's really creepy that snuck through. And part of the problem is that a lot of parents would sit down their kid and you know how you can have autoplay? And so they would just sit and the kid would be there for a couple hours watching whatever came up. And a lot of this content was coming up.
Yeah.
And that stuff, can be traumatizing.
And I know that it is hard to do this nowadays, but I believe that parents should be monitoring literally everything they are doing on the internet until the child is of age.
39.
Yeah, if you're doing autoplay on YouTube for your children, there's no way the world is going to you can't depend on the world to filter. You have to be the one. When I was a kid, for example, it was really hard to come into contact with, bad material. But 2, my parents they were either watching TV with me or they were in the kitchen, within earshot. They knew everything I was doing.
Yeah.
That is a good model of life. And the fact, again, that we have this new technology doesn't change that. Doesn't say like, well, this is the new life. What are you going to do? It's like, no, there are ways to monitor it. It's hard, and it would be a pain in the ass to have to combat with, especially like a 12-year-old who is already getting a little snotty, and all their friends have free access all the time. But it's a norm that we have to, I think, change. Last thing I'll say before I go back to Logan Paul, I remember when cell phones, first became ubiquitous for teenagers. There was a couple of years where schools were extremely strict about cell phones in classrooms. They would say, if I see a cell phone, I'm taking it.
Yeah.
And, kids, every class was like that. Our society felt that way. Parents understood. No parent would expect their kid to get away with being able to view their phone during class. Everyone was like, yeah, that's there's no reason why a, 8th grader needs to be looking at their phone while they're in class.
Right.
Seemingly to me, overnight, that switched, where now it's like the vast majority of reports I hear, it's like, well, you can't get in the way of kids and their smartphones.
Oh my God.
You just can't do
that's insane.
What are you going to do? Sometimes I see kids, they're texting and stuff, and You know, if I see too much of it, I'll tell them to stop it. You know, this isn't all teachers, of course, but, and parents will be like texting their kids while they're in class. You know what I mean? They'll be expecting this kind of thing. And kids will absolutely expect to be able to have access to these sort of things. And that's a cultural shift that we didn't have to do. We could have resisted that. Yeah. We could have said no, and we could go back to that. But
what if we put implants on the kids that not only show us everything they're seeing, but filter out, like blur out offensive content?
Archangel. So, getting back to Logan Paul. So after the Japanese forest incident, he releases this apology video, which is tonally not so great, but he starts to go back into content, and so if he was more mature or wasn't 10%, 20% on the psychopathic spectrum, he probably would have course corrected and had, more empathy or some kind of, better direction. But he continued to make offensive or difficult videos. Like, for instance, there's some famous ones. He talked about participating in the Tide Pod Challenge, for example.
Oh my gosh.
Which we talked about in another episode. There was, he has a pond in his backyard, and he found one of his koi fish had died. And so he pulls it out, and it's this big to-do. Now, the tagline people will report without watching the video, they'll be like, he gave CPR to a dead fish.
Oh, okay.
So that sounds like, that sounds kind of what?
Yeah.
But when you watch the video and in the context of all of his other videos, it makes total sense. He woke up in the morning and he's like, shit, what am I going to create content today?
Yeah.
And someone's like, I think one of your fishes died. And they're like, well, we could make that into a video. How about I am really sad and freaking out about my dead fish. And that's the premise. And you guys are there trying to help me. I'm distraught. Okay. And they improv it essentially. Yeah. And so he comes down and he's like distraught, and he's just like, and it pops into his head at some point during the obnoxiousness of his reaction. He's like, oh, I'll try to do chest compressions to bring it back to life. And he puts it back in the water, and he's trying to get it to breathe, and then at some point he puts his mouth to mouth. He tries to do mouth to mouth. Yeah. I think anyway. He definitely did the rest of it. Now, the tagline is he, did CPR to a dead fish. But when you watch the video again in the context of all his other videos, you're just like, oh, well, one of his fish died, and he did it. And I don't know a lot of people that are super attached to
that. Seems like the least offensive video I've ever heard of.
Right. It's not really, but it's one of the ones that the media will identify. And obviously he's a psychopath because cruelty to animals, right? That's what when you're cruel to animals, psychopaths are cruel to animals.
But it was the implication that he killed his own fish?
No. One of his dozens of fish.
Did I remind people that they boil lobsters alive for fun?
Exactly. Exactly. Or shoot deer or bears or cheetahs or lions. It's just like, that's not necessarily psychopathic. It could be, but vast majority of people who hunt aren't.
Well, it's clear. Yeah, like I was talking to someone the other day that is a hunter, or
a fisher for that matter.
Yeah, in this case, he's a hunter. Well, I'm sure he also fishes, but he's also ex-army, or like I think he's still active, or he's reserves or something. I don't know, but the point is, he's been in the military, and he hunts. I didn't once get the sense from my conversation with him about his hunting experiences that, oh my God, this guy loves killing and maiming and torturing animals.
Yeah.
It was just a thing he does, and he eats all the food he hunts, all the blah. Whereas you could imagine someone that actually uses that excuse because they love killing animals and even maybe not killing them fully. And, so you could absolutely see, but that's not the norm.
Right. He also made a video in which the tagline is he tasered dead rats.
Okay.
Taser Logan Paul tasers dead rats. He's a psychopath. Who does that? Okay. But again, you watch the video, and again, I'm speculating, but they woke up in the morning. They're like, shit, what am I going to do today?
Yeah.
And they had a trap for rats and mice. to, kill them, as a lot of people will do.
They kill rats?
Right. And they found 2 rats that had been killed by a trap, I think, if I'm remembering right. They came across 2 dead rats. That's what I definitely know. And I think it was from a trap. And again, Logan Paul, he is appealing to 10-year-olds. He's trying to make the most obnoxious, quote unquote, funny thing. And his whole shtick, which apparently makes him millions of dollars, is to be over the top and goofy.
Yeah.
He is frantic, over the top, and silly. And so what he did was he saw the rats, and and I'm guessing this is what he said prior to the camera rolling. He's like, okay, I'm going to do the premise like the rats are invaders, and I'm trying to get them out of my house, but I'm so dumb that they're already dead. I don't realize that.
I see.
That's the joke.
That's the joke.
Okay. And so the camera starts rolling, the friends find the rats. He comes out and he's like, you can't get in my house. And, cause they're on his porch, and he's standing over them like 5 feet away, and he shoots one of the rats with the taser has the, the wires that come out. And the other, the friends are like, whoa, what are you doing? He's like, well, you get near my house, you're going to invade my house, you're going to get tased.
And the kids are like, ah!
Right. Now, he didn't grab rats and strangle them to death and then
tase them
and then torture them. These were dead rats, and he thought he had a premise for a video. Right. Now, on the heels of the Japan video, a smarter, mature, person who had, better advisors would be like, let's stay away from
dead things,
these kinds of topics. And he actually talks about that more recently. He just released another kind of further apology video just last week. And he talks about how he learned over this past year that he needs to listen to people more. Like, that's one of his big things. He's just like, the thing I learned this last year was I can't just operate on my own impulse. I can't just operate on my own notions.
Right. Like learning that his instincts may not be the best when it comes to some stuff.
Right. But you could see how he thought that before. Right. Because everything had worked out for him. Yeah. From the age of 10 until the age of 22. Right. All of his impulses paid off. And so he's like, listening to people is a big part. He also said empathy is a big part. He's like, I need to have more empathy. He says, I need to really put myself in other people's shoes more often. Now, he's 22, 23. The way he talks about it, he still has a way to go. Right. Because the things that I would hope someone would say, he's not saying. But again, it's a progression. He's moving down the road. So that's another famous video. He also supports the flat Earth movement.
For real, or as a troll?
It seems for real.
What? No.
Well, he's acting. Okay. I think I would want to believe that he doesn't actually believe the Earth is
useful,
particularly because he's flown all over the Earth. Do you know what I mean? Like he's a world traveler, given his job, that he understands, the basics, but I think he.
But so he's he's got videos about it.
But he's public about supporting the flat Earth movement. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, so the more recent apologies as they became, somewhat more mature. So there's this one video where I kind of liked the beginning where he's like, he seems genuinely remorseful about the Japan video. He seems, and then he talks about the rat video and the fish video, and he shows like all these clips of people railing on him, famous people speaking out against him. Like there's no punches are being pulled, and he shows clips of him doing stupid shit, and he's talking over it, and he's just like, I don't know what I was thinking. So in this video, he actually says things that I was like, oh, okay, he seems to have some perspective. He's like, I was young. I had to create something every day. I had been successful in everything I had done. I had never stopped to think that maybe I might hurt someone's feelings. Like that hadn't crossed my mind. I thought everything I did was going to be great. And so I just kept doing it. And I felt like I was becoming some weird nightmare of a person. And I was just getting worse and worse and worse. And I wasn't listening to people, and I wasn't thinking about other people's feelings. And then I made the Japan video, and that was a disaster. And I came out with an apology video, but really I still hadn't learned. And then I made the rat video and the fish video. And then I had to just really sit down and think like, wait a second, like something's wrong with me. Like I'm going too fast, he said. I'm moving too quickly. Like I need to slow down and listen to people and actually like ask my friends and family around me, like, what do you think about this idea? And then I have to listen to that. I can't just blow them off. I have to be like, and listen to my listeners. I have to like ask them, what do you feel about this? Is this what you want? And it's sounding more mature, but then it ends. So at this point I'm like, oh, okay, this is sounding pretty good. But then he ends it with the climax as the music is swelling and the edits are getting more sunsetty and everything. He's like, and then I decided, you know what? I am going to, and I'm paraphrasing because he worded it more eloquently or more self-servingly. I'm going to box KSI. He ends the whole
KSI.
So he's that.
Oh, that's when he announced he was gonna.
Well, yeah, but he actually. So this video, he's actually recalling him making that choice. Because I'm like, okay, where is this going? And he's like, because I wanted to prove to myself, I wanted to get to my roots, and I wanted to prove. I think is what he's saying. I want to prove to myself that I can do something with integrity. And I'm like, boxing, okay. It's great. You can box if you want to, but that doesn't demonstrate integrity.
Right.
What would have demonstrated integrity would have been like a quiet dedication to suicide prevention or a decision to create content that benefits society and maybe some examples of that. Like he makes a video about putting balls in a bus, and at the end he has, what? For every one of these balls, I'm donating $5 to children who have trouble getting to school. Or for every view I get, or something, like that would have been, really growing up, right? Not I've grown up and now I'm going to do a boxing match. You know what I mean?
That's a weird association.
I know.
I wonder if he means because he's got to train for it.
Yeah, so there's lots of montage of him literally carrying a tree, cross training without a shirt on. Lots of shots without his shirt on, and I think that's what he means. It's like he equates, because that's where he comes from, is like football and wrestling. Yeah. Integrity was and honor was associated with sports dedication and achievement, which isn't necessarily untrue, but it's definitely not the progression that I thought he was headed towards when he was talking about making all these mistakes and not caring about other people and, all these kinds of things.
Yeah, it is a weird side swipe there.
Yeah. And I don't think I think that might be evidence of that 10 to 20% psychopathy, but more I think of it is just immaturity. He's a child. When we were that age, like I probably would have thought similar things. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, now a lot of people are saying he's going too far and he's a psychopath. And, you look at any commentary on Logan Paul and they're like, he's gone too far. He needs to be shut down. What do you think about that, Berto?
Oh, right. So there's a mix here that I think is important. One of them is I absolutely support the right of private companies to limit access to their services to whomever they want. So, because there's a lot of people that come out and say, like, you should not limit this creator from your platform because that's limiting their freedom of speech.
Censorship.
Right. But I'm saying, like, that would be true if it were some sort of public property. But you're a private company and you have terms of service. And if someone violates your terms of service, you have the right to not let them do their thing. Now, if your terms of service can be proven in a court to be like discriminatory to the class of to a protected class, well, sure. Now we're back on the onus is on you to not do that. But when it comes to like, Twitter, YouTube, etc., it's like, hey, we have this creator. They're creating content that's hurting our business and it's offending our customers. We're going to limit them. I think that's perfectly reasonable.
Totally.
The flip side is, do I believe that...
And as an example, Alex Jones inciting actual human beings to potentially try to kill or at least harm other human beings.
Exactly. Now, do I believe that in this particular instance...
And being very convincing to a certain subsection of people.
Yeah, exactly. Do I believe that in this instance, this particular creator, Logan Paul, did things that warranted a company excluding him from the platform? In my personal opinion, if I were making those decisions, probably not, because, it's kind of hard to demonstrate that he directly caused harm or that he definitely was offensive. But that's sort of where I think,
for example, you could make the argument that news channels that depict violence that had occurred to victims as being exploitative of victim harm, even if they blur out the faces or something. And one could make the argument that's what he was doing. Yeah. It was extremely distasteful, but not that much different than what a lot of other news that are on public TV, let alone the internet.
So there's that. I also think the more we've talked about this, coming into this, I had a really negative perspective on the guy and the whole topic. But talking it through, I'm realizing just kind of how unfair that is from the perspective of like, man, I know how many dumb decisions and bad things I did growing up that I'm ashamed of, and that, who am I to like be so like judgmental in that sense?
Yeah, and imagine that each one of those dumb decisions was essentially loved and lauded by millions of devoted fans. Right. Like, you're in college and you get so drunk you puke all over the place.
And people are like, whoa!
Yeah, and like you post that. Yeah. And, while you're doing that, you're also like yelling something about Jewish people or something, and you post it, and millions upon millions of people are like, oh my God, that was so funny. Like, you should do another one where you get super drunk, and then every month, YouTube just sends a check. Yeah. And so every month, like, you're getting potentially like $1 million. Imagine $1 million deposit from YouTube in 1 month. $1 million. And, of the 20 or 30 videos you had made that month, one of them was you getting drunk and puking and saying something anti-Semitic or something. You're going to be like, well, let's keep going down that road.
Yeah, right. And the other part is just thinking about me with my shopping or money spending problems that I had. I had many points where I thought I had reached a point of sobriety, right? Like where I was like, oh, right. Okay, I get it. I shouldn't waste all this money on these fancy clothes every month. I'll just do it every quarter. Then I was like, oh, right. I shouldn't go in these spending sprees of clothes. Now, music equipment, that's a different, and I went through all these different plateaus where I'm still growing in my life, right? So to say like, well, your one mistake you made that you got your hand slapped for, that should have been your final resting place of growth, right? That's not realistic either.
Yeah. I think the two main questions that people should be asking, which I don't see people asking, is why are so many people claiming that he's a psychopath and speaking out against him? Why, like you walked into this episode, going like, you had a general reaction, which I think is shared by the vast majority of adults. Yeah. Which is something's wrong with him. Right. And we need to get rid of that guy.
Stop stomping on my lawn.
Yeah.
And go to bed.
we need that guy to shut up.
Right.
There's something wrong with him. That's interesting. That's an interesting phenomenon.
Right.
That is, I find, given the context, interesting to me.
I wonder if it's
which I don't share.
I wonder if it's like Elvis. You know, like Elvis comes out, and a lot of adults are like, "What the hell is going on?"
Yeah, very, very similar analogy. I'm sure in 1,000 years they'll lump those two people together. They'll be like, yeah, back in the old days there was this Elvis and there was this Logan Paul, and the kids loved him and the parents hated him.
Because Elvis was very aware that his hip gyrations were not very pure.
Yeah, and parents hated him. Right. So there, were. So that's an interesting question. The other interesting question is, why do kids love him so much?
Yeah.
That's another interesting question. If you are upset and menaced by Logan Paul, shutting down Logan Paul isn't going to do anything. There's just going to be another Logan Paul. Literally his brother Jake Paul will just pick up where Logan Paul has left off.
Yeah.
So getting rid of Logan Paul it's similar if you hate Donald Trump, getting rid of Donald Trump is not the answer. The question is, why did so many people vote Trump into office?
Yeah.
Why is Logan Paul so rich? Why do people love him so much? That is the question you need to ask yourself. And as parents, as societies, as, people, older people, we have to look at what are we doing to kids to make them so gleeful about watching an older kid disrespect adults in society so much?
Yeah.
What are we doing to 10-year-olds to make them need a champion of anti-rules, right, and anti-society and anti-parents and pro Rolex watches and Lamborghinis? What are we doing to 10-year-olds to make them so needful of content like this? Now, maybe nothing can be done. Maybe it's innate when you're 10, you will feel powerless because you have to feel powerless because you don't know what you're doing, even though you have a lot of impulses that you think are good impulses. But as parents, we know those are bad impulses. Eating 5 candy bars before you go to bed, bad impulse. And you think it's a good impulse. And so you have this innate sense of unfairness of authority. And so maybe that's it. But I would contend that that's true. But I would also argue that another portion of it, if, half, maybe of that energy in kids is because of the way we treat kids, like in the old days, you would have, you'd be given responsibilities. One, you'd work on the farm, you'd have a job to do, you'd feel good about yourself. You'd have a lot more freedom. I mean, the amount of rules and micromanaging of particularly Western, middle-class kids these days is, I don't know if that's so great. It's probably not horrible, but one of the side effects I think is Logan Paul, Jake Paul, PewDiePie, these, and all the commercials that, have you ever watched a commercial geared towards an 8-year-old or a 10-year-old?
No.
It's 50% of the time it's ridiculing adults.
Oh.
Tricks are for kids.
Oh, sure.
But today there's many commercials like that where like a police officer or a teacher or a dad tries to do something, but the 10-year-olds, they know what's up. You know what I mean? And they win the day, and the dad's over there going like, I guess I'm really dumb. And it's interesting, I think. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's fascinating. I do think that there's something innate in the need for exploration at an early age, where essentially your brain has to be picking up new things so that it can learn. And if you didn't have a very strong impulse towards trying things and exploring, then you probably would be stunted in your growth. But at the same time, you have this competing force of the adults trying to keep you alive because you don't know how to stay alive in the environment. And then you probably see that as a negative because you're like, you don't understand. Since you don't understand the risks, you don't understand why they have to impose all these barriers. Now, as far as like the differences between quote unquote the old days to now, I see your point, although the flip side of that is how, imagine, when you did have to start working the fields at like 8 or 10 or something, imagine how serious your life had to be compared to how much levity you can have now when you don't have to do those things.
Right. So there are pros and cons for sure. But
so I wonder if creativity would actually, this is an interesting piece.
I mean, just one thing is like, we are allowed now to essentially not have much responsibility until many middle-class kids are like 25 years old.
Yeah.
So, and some can go much longer if they decide to stay home, and that allows for more relaxation, more creativity. But there's a cost that I think is self-esteem. There's a lot of 17-year-olds walking around with terrible self-esteem.
Yeah.
And I think part of the problem is our society is set up so that they're treated like they're 7 until they're 25. It's not all kids.
Yeah.
But I think a 16-year-old should be required to get a part-time job.
Yeah, right.
If possible.
So
because there's a tremendous amount of self-esteem that's gained.
Yeah.
It's scary, but you succeed, you make some mistakes, but eventually, a year later, you're a better worker. You feel good about yourself. Right. You're earning your own money, blah, blah, blah. And there's a movement in our society to actually not do that for a lot of kids because we think that it's actually good for kids to give them time, like that, they need to work on school and this kind of thing. And
well, to put some stuff in perspective, like I was just talking about this with a friend yesterday. For like 200,000 years, hominids had essentially our same brain and yet almost didn't progress technologically at all. And all of a sudden, because agriculture finally starts working out, more advances start happening a lot more quicker, and so you could see how when you have a life where like your day has to be led in a certain way as a tribe, and there's not a lot of room for wiggling and just kind of like doing whatever, because there are predators, because if you don't keep moving, you don't necessarily guarantee to get your food, all these kinds of things. There is less leisure and exploratory and creative time probably. And then all of a sudden where you have an environment where like you can stay in one region for a longer period of time, food is a little bit more guaranteed on a regular basis, and so forth and so forth. Now you do have a little bit more. And then the more that progresses, and especially the more that jobs start getting specialized, and you're like, oh, actually, I don't have to plow the fields. I can be over here doing something. And wealth starts developing. And then so now a wealthy family can afford their kids to sit around and think all day, right? So that accelerates, development. And then along with that, this notion of
technological development.
So
not necessarily personality development.
Well, absolutely, right. And so, and then there's this balance that you're talking about, how at some point, Alexander the Great, I think, was like 21 at his height of power, something like 24 at most or something like that. So think about a Jake Paul, the Logan Paul, leading armies to take over full nations, right?
Yeah.
And with all the same mistakes and all the same immaturities and all these kinds of things because of brain development, but with all the responsibilities of leading full armies and all these kinds of things. And so kids had to kind of grow up in the harsh realities of the world a lot sooner. You saw death a lot sooner. You had to deal with disease and death and violence constantly at a much younger age than nowadays. And so it's kind of it is a trade-off, right? If you think about like, if we were having this podcast 1,000 years ago, right? And we were talking about like, can you believe what that 19-year-old did the other day? It's like, I can't believe he raped all those women in that invasion of that land that they just invaded. It's like, yeah, I know, that's so immature and all these kinds of things. Like, we'd be dealing with really horrible things, right? Here we're talking about like, can you believe he said that in that one video episode he filmed? And so it's
right.
It's like the scale is even different.
Yeah. All right, let's take a break. When we get back, let's truly go through antisocial and psychopathic personality disorder criteria. What do you say, Berto?
Let's do it.
All right, we're back from the break. Okay, antisocial personality disorder. First criterion, failure to conform to social norms. Does he meet this criterion?
Yes.
How so?
At least he has demonstrated that. By some of the examples you were giving where, you don't generally jump on someone else's vehicle, much less, like a...
That might have been Jake Paul, by the way. I'm not sure about that one, but it certainly would be something that Logan Paul would.
And basically, you go to a different place, you're sort of expected to respect their local norms and culture and guidelines, and pretty much not go and run up and start yelling at them and insulting them and things like that.
Exactly. And he admits to this, and he actually says, in not so many words, that he believes he has some sociopathic traits because he can do this when other people can't. Yeah. I mean, even his own friends that are sort of around him on these videos, from the ones that I've seen, are a little aghast at Logan Paul's bravery, so to speak, or non-concern for bothering other people. Right. The Japan video is particularly stark because there's so many people in Tokyo, and he's just running around and bothering people, and the Japanese people and the authorities are so polite, you know. And he looks so weird because he also dresses in these he buys like funny clothes. Right. And he just, I don't know. So
wasn't he also doing a bit of wasn't he wearing like Chinese clothing or something, or like?
No, I mean, it's an Asian, Japan shares that hat that you see, a straw hat, it's a Japanese thing too.
But wasn't he like using it for comedic effect or something?
Yeah, I mean, he's running around in a shrine that I've actually been to in Tokyo, where there's many, many people, and he has like a goofy kimono on, and like a kimono you'd buy in a dollar store or something. Yeah. And then one of those Japanese hats, and his friend has the same outfit on. They're running around like there's a shrine where a Shinto shrine. That's in a lot of the Shinto shrines where you will put money into this old altar. It looks kind of like an ancient-y altar, and you do a little prayer, and you ask, the gods for fortune, or to have a kid, or long life, or something. And it's usually quite somber, because it's even though it's a tourist attraction, it's pretty quiet and, Japan-like. Yeah. And he's screaming and like throwing money in and like, I'm gonna, so absolutely antisocial personality disorder criterion, failure to conform to social norms. He absolutely exhibits some of that there. But this is where non-clinicians do not understand what we're talking about in the DSM when we're talking about failure to conform to social norms. We're certainly talking about that in a sense, but really what we're talking about, a typical person with antisocial personality disorder is frequently committing criminal behavior. I see. Like shoplifting, or punching someone in the face, like you mentioned, or shooting people, or embezzling, having a pattern of embezzling money, harassing other people, abusing other people.
It's like Bernie Madoff, probably psychopathic.
Right. To be able to do that, I mean, I don't know, I haven't looked into his personality, but that level of behavior and a pattern of it, he is doing a shtick for entertainment. Yeah. Like Sacha Baron Cohen. Right. You wouldn't call him a psychopath, would you? But he's absolutely bothering people in his work. Right. But it appeals to old people, old liberals. And so we don't label him as a psychopath, but we don't like Logan Paul, so we label him as a psychopath. Now, but I will say that, like we were saying before, most people, you couldn't pay him enough money to do what he does. Right. And he personality-wise is different, but he's not that much different. Yeah. He's just somewhat different.
But that's an excellent example. There's a lot of things that Sacha Baron Cohen did, or that Jackass did, that you couldn't pay most people money to do. And we still never labeled Jackass as anything other than, those goofy guys, I did.
I thought one of the guys, I can't remember his name, he gave me a very psychopathic vibe.
Bam Margera?
No, it was the other guy who kind of looks like Bam. But Bam kind of gave me a little bit of weird vibe too. Okay. The main guy never gave me a weird vibe.
Johnny Knoxville.
And Steve-O never gave me a weird vibe, but anyway. But I don't know. But I remember feeling like this would attract a certain kind of personality, and it could attract, because antisocial people, because of their lack of concern about other people, would have an easier time with jackassery, and they also are kind of dangerous to their own bodies.
Oh, I guess, but I'm not even saying they're not or aren't. I'm remembering at the time, they were only controversial in the vanilla sense. Like at the time when Jackass came out and all this stuff, sure, the older adults would go, oh my gosh, what are kids watching these days? But there was never none of them got roasted on, national news of
Right. Well, as far as we knew, and, but it appealed to us because we were 20.
Or their show wasn't threatened to be canceled or any of that stuff.
Right. So I'll give him a 20% on Criterion 1. 2, deceitfulness. This is like lying or being a con artist. Does he have this?
I don't know. I haven't seen all his shows, all his episodes. It seems like he does it at least at face value for entertainment. Clearly he knew the rats weren't dead. Clearly he knew the pool, whatever, right? But that doesn't seem like I'm going to swindle these people out of money.
Right. Yeah. I don't see any evidence of this. Maybe someone close to him could, provide some data. Yeah. This is where, our limited perspective is, shown in that if he was deceitful or lying or conning people, it'd be hard for us to detect that given that we only can see his YouTube video. But it doesn't seem like he does. There's no evidence of this anyway. Some people say well, come on, he's, tricking the world, blah, blah, blah. It's no, again, this is where lay people have no experience actually working with people with antisocial personality disorder. Typical antisocial personality disorder people will callously con other people. I met someone like this. My friends, actually, Chris Huber and Jeff Odegaard. You know those two guys. Yep. They met this guy who, at first they loved him, and I was like, oh yeah, he's fine, but Huber and Odegaard loved this guy. Yeah. He was just he's the best, and so he was suddenly our best friend. Yeah. And
is this the guy I know of?
No, you've never met him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we only knew him for 6 months, maybe a year or something. And so, now I'm wondering who you're thinking of. Well, tell me later. Yeah. But he about 6 months into this very intense friendship, they became best friends. I think he even moved in with Odie and Huber, or one of them, and he comes forward and he says, I have cancer. And his hair was gone, and all of a sudden everyone was like, oh my God, so we're, I don't know, 23 or 25, and we're just terrified. We're like, oh my God, he's like, yeah, it's brain cancer. I think I'm going to die, or some kind of cancer. And so we, every time we see him, we're like, how you doing? How's treatment going? It's just a very caring environment around him. A lot of things are happening outside of my awareness. My friends were loaning him money, and were letting him, not pay for rent, and we're just doing a lot of favors. Then one day, I think this is how it goes. He skips town. Something happens where it's just wait, what's happening? And then they started questioning, well, what if he's lying to us about the cancer thing?
Right.
Long story short, they find out he was lying the entire time. And, one of the things we learned later, because we didn't have the internet back then, was when you lose your hair from chemotherapy, your hair follicle, you don't have a 5 o'clock shadow on your head. Do you know what I mean?
Right. It's the whole thing fell out.
The whole follicle the whole hair falls out. Yeah. So you're smooth. Yeah. Your head is eyebrow.
He was clearly shaving.
Where you could see stubble on his head.
Oh my God.
But we didn't know, or
who does that?
So then they started investigating, because he left a bunch of stuff, including his car in my friend's garage. They started finding all these old boxes of stuff, and they find letters from this woman who had been writing him, who he had married had almost married or something, and had scammed a bunch of money from this family, and had just skipped town.
Okay.
So this is an antisocial personality disordered person. imagine the lack of conscience and the lack of empathy that you would have to just go from town to town and weasel, knowing from the very beginning you're gonna screw these people over.
That's crazy, man.
That's talk about not being able to pay me enough to jump on top of a news van. Like, this would be like,
right.
There's no way.
That's pathological.
So that is antisocial personality disorder. Right. And the other element I haven't mentioned yet was when the dust settled and everything was said and done, my friends had his car, had a lot of his stuff, had evidence against him, sold his car,
right,
made money back. And as far as they knew, the guy was penniless and friendless.
Yeah,
and
so he shot himself in the foot constantly.
That's another element of antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy that people really don't understand on the internet.
Right.
They think psychopaths and, so-called sociopaths are these like conniving geniuses.
Yeah.
99.9% of them, even the smart ones, make terrible decisions. That's one of the hallmarks of someone with antisocial personality disorder. That's why so many of them end up in jail. If they were geniuses, they would figure out a way to avoid jail. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But so many of them end up in prison because they act impulsively. They don't think about their overall goal. This guy was conning without the bigger picture of, how do I make out of this with more money than I went into it? Better off than what I went into it. That wasn't part of his makeup, because a lot of people with antisocial are like that. Number 3 is impulsive. Is he impulsive? Logan Paul.
Yeah, it sounds like he has been. That part, I mean, a lot of people, when you're young, you're impulsive. So that piece sort of like is not so shocking. But it seems like he even self-describes like he wouldn't listen to advice, or he would just, and a lot of the things you're mentioning, it's probably how it worked, where he woke up one morning, like you're saying, and he's like, oh, what should we do? Oh, that sounds good. Let's just do that. And not really thinking it through. But it doesn't sound necessarily, well, or like in jumping and he falls and he hurts himself so bad that he ends up in the ER and he loses, part of his body. At the same time, I don't know, because I don't have enough evidence. Like, I don't know if this is a constant behavior, or if it's really more a function of, I need to find entertaining content today. Or is it like he's sitting there with friends, not recording at all, and all of a sudden he does really like dangerous, impulsive things left and right all the time? I don't know.
Exactly. Very good. That's what I would say. It's hard to know. Is he turning it on for the camera, or is he like this all the time? Hard to say, but there is some evidence of some antisocial psychopathic impulsivity. The posting the forest video, that's evidence of like not thinking things through.
Right.
And when you watch him in his videos, like, again, if you asked us to say, okay, I'm going to pay you $1 million a month to act frantically impulsive, because the videos he makes, he films most of them over the span of what's probably a few hours.
Right.
And then they edit it down to like 20 minutes, He is massively on fire for the entire time. Like he's like, Robin Williams kind of a thing. Now, some would say, well, is that ADHD, hyperactivity? Could be, which is another thing, but hard to tell, because again,
right,
you'd really have to evaluate him all the time, especially when he's not on camera.
But I mean, you know me, if I was going to make that kind of bank, I'm not saying I'm going to do illegal things or anything like that, but if you want me to act like loud and emotional and impulsive for a couple I will do it.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And it doesn't make me a lot of other things.
Doesn't make you antisocial. Yeah. People with antisocial personality disorder, the idea is that as they were growing up, their brain was such that, and or their environment was such that they didn't learn behavioral controls that other kids learn.
Yeah.
Behavioral controls of like, don't punch people in the face.
Yeah.
Don't blurt out that statement. Don't, slam doors when you feel like it. don't steal that thing off of the counter because you want it. They don't incorporate those into their processes of behavior. That's the impulsiveness that they're talking. They're not talking about making a video and being frantic, making a video and looking impulsive. Like that's a decision he's probably making, or at least he's amping up his hyperactivity or even hypomania, which is another thing we can talk about later is like, because actually you and I are hypomanic.
Yep.
In the sense of the MMPI, which is that we're not bipolar, but you and I have a tremendous amount of energy.
Yep.
You compare you and me to average people, and they wouldn't be able to keep their energy up for all the things we do throughout our days.
Yeah, right. And I was also thinking about how impulsive, what does impulsive mean? Because like I look back and I feel like I was very impulsive when I was younger. But I don't know if I mean it in the same way that you mean it for this purpose. Meaning, I remember being in meetings where I would blurt out things just because I was like, it felt like the right thing to say.
Well, knowing your personality, it's probably impulsivity related to narcissism,
I see.
Of like, I deserve to be heard now. And I just had an idea and I don't really care if it's,
That seems right.
Yeah.
Or
aren't you glad I know you so well?
Or yes.
I mean, again, I'm 5%, so
or impulsivity when it came to like the purchasing stuff, which it was related to other issues. But I certainly was never recklessly impulsive with dangerous situations,
Right. So with Logan Paul, if there's a lot of things that we're not seeing that we would see if he was quintessentially impulsively antisocial, like being very reckless.
Yeah.
And
it doesn't sound like he's aggressive in general or violent in general.
As far as I know, no.
Yeah.
And he has to be incredibly well planned.
Yeah.
Now it might be well planned chaos.
Right.
But again, there are a lot of charismatic 20-year-olds with smartphones that can record and post things on YouTube.
Right.
It requires someone with a credible amount of planning to do all the things that he does, because he doesn't just do random YouTube videos. He has a podcast. He has a clothing line. He, like I said on this vlog, he had to come up every day with something new.
Yeah.
Like
and the consistency of doing these things all the time, regularly, and not getting bored or getting unreliable about it or being flaky. That's something.
Right. An impulsive, antisocial, psychopath person would potentially impulsively wake up one day and just be like, I'm moving to New York.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to bring anything with me. I'll figure it out once I get there. Sort of this not good planning ahead. Like a lot of antisocial people, psychopathic people, especially people with, some of you listening out there might even have family members like this, where you just are boggled by when you look back on their life, you're just boggled at the decisions that they've made, very often shooting themselves in the foot. Number 4, irritability and aggressiveness. We just talked about that. Can't find any evidence of this. In fact, he really seems quite amiable. I'm sure people can cite examples if they want to email in, but unless there's a pervasive pattern of, again, shooting yourself in the foot aggressiveness, then he really doesn't meet this criterion. People with antisocial personality disorder can really be quite unpleasant individuals, difficult to get along with. You don't want to really be around them. They can be quite angry at the world, noticeably rageful at times. And another thing that often isn't associated with antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy is people with these conditions generally don't feel very good about life.
Oh, okay.
Like people associate psychopath, they figure out how to manipulate the world. They're just laughing themselves asleep.
Twirling their fingers.
Yeah, it's like, no. You talk to a person who is suffering from psychopathy or antisocial, they are not happy individuals.
Right.
They have a disorder that creates a lot of impulses and a lot of difficulty with understanding the world, difficulty knowing what their own needs are.
Yeah.
And difficulty understanding other people, and which leads to a lot of really bad things happening, losing a job, drinking too much, pushing people away, going to prison, losing your car, losing your house. This is not a happy life.
Right.
And Logan Paul seems extremely happy.
Psychopaths are not masterminds.
They're not happy masterminds. They're actually quite depressed. Antisocial people, psychopathic people have higher rates of suicide.
Yeah.
Anyway, number 5, reckless disregard of safety of self and others.
That I could see some examples of. I think a lot of these shock broadcasters, like the ones we were talking about, Jackass, even Sacha Baron Cohen and stuff like that, they have some amount of that. Because you got, I mean, like that guy, even though like he walks into a bar where he could get shot by saying certain things,
right?
And he just does it.
Totally. You know? Yeah. So that's on the spectrum. That's a trait, right? For me, it's like when I watch these kinds of things, I'm like, I would be too afraid of breaking my neck or something, you know? So it's a trait. Now he's only like 20% down that road, because he can do these stunts, and he can hurt himself and get back up and do it again. He can, put himself in danger in Japan, all this kind of things.
And you could even point to something like Jackie Chan, who has made a career of doing really dangerous things.
Yeah, hard to say with him because it's more of a dance than it is like true danger, but some of it is truly dangerous.
And I'm just kind of saying, like, it gets a little gray when it comes to an entertainer doing, like, or you take circus performers, like these Cirque du Soleil people, sometimes they die.
Yeah.
And they do these crazy maneuvers, or the people that are tightrope walkers, or the free climber recently that climbed El Capitan or whatever without any ropes or anything.
Have you watched that?
Yes.
Oh my God.
It's insanity.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So then you got to wonder, well, where is that on the spectrum? Right?
I don't know. I haven't looked at that. I'm going to plead the fifth on that one.
I will say
that's interesting.
In his defense, like the amount of training and studying of that route and doing the route over and over and over and over and over and over and over to the point where he's got every single little move memorized doesn't point to recklessness and all these things.
Yeah, it's not like he just walked up to a cliff and decided.
And same thing with Jackie Chan and a lot of these others. It's a lifetime of training.
But it is an interesting question.
Yeah.
I mean, one theory about how antisocial and psychopathy develop is that some people are born with an underdeveloped fear system in their brain.
Yeah.
And one of the effects is that they become extremely impulsive and dangerous in their life, not only with themselves, but with other people and they become callous and lack empathy for other people because, and I've talked about this on the podcast before, when you are learning you're developing your superego, part of the thing that really internalizes the experience of other people is fear. So you are on the playground, you're 3 years old, and you throw a rock at someone's head because you feel like you want to do that. And then out of nowhere, your dad comes screaming at you and he's big and he's clomping his way over to you. He's like, what did you just do?
And he grabs you by the scruff.
And he's very stern, and he's like, we're going home. You just, and in that, those 5 seconds, children will have a visceral fear reaction to their father.
So they associate with, if you do this, you might end up being very fearful.
Right. So the next time you pick up a rock, your body remembers that. You're just like, if I throw it. So there's some models of morality that are basically based entirely on this experience.
Yeah.
That, you and me can't jump on top of a news van because we were terrified so many times by enacting impulses along those lines, sufficient so that now it's like hard for us to even think about doing that, you know? And in the same way that it's hard for us to climb El Capitan without any, or at all, right?
I wonder if you need a mix of that and empathy so that you have, because like, I feel like showing a child how to put yourself in someone else's shoes and all these things is probably a great method, but I don't know how well it works in the instant, like as a like when you're trying to curb an impulse. Whereas fear probably works really well to curb an impulse.
Right. Age of, 0 months, you have a fear response, whereas an empathy response you don't have.
Right.
So so some will say, and I think it's a fair argument, it's impossible to really know, that our empathy is just a product of fear. When you put yourself in someone else's shoes, or when, like, again, the progression is, I have an impulse to throw a rock at someone's head, and you do that and your dad comes clomping over, you're afraid. The next time you feel like doing it, your body has almost like a PTSD reaction to throwing. You compound that, several other times where you're in the 3rd grade and you call someone fat, and then, the teacher yells at you, or the kid yells at you. The kid's like, or kid starts to scream, or the kid cries or something, and you're like, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble because I just made a kid cry, And then you do that, you rinse and repeat that. You're, 40 something years old, and you have an impulse to call someone a name, and you have a feeling of cringing, or a feeling of fear almost, but we frame that as empathy. I have empathy for that person.
The part where I would delineate it maybe differently is that, because by definition, what you're kind of seeing is the knowledge that the thing that you may be doing to this person, or maybe about to do this person, if it were done to you, would lead you to those negative feelings, as opposed to the subtly different one is, if I do this to them, I will get hurt by having done that to them. Because you see, in one case, the hurt comes to you because you did the bad action and someone then hurts you. In the other case, you realize, if someone did this bad action to me, it would hurt me, and I don't like being hurt.
But that could be just a further elaboration on the original fear of something.
And I buy that. So
it's impossible. Then I'm not saying this is true. It's just
but
possible.
I'm agreeing with you that in both cases, you can the thing you're empathizing with in any case is like, I don't like being hurt.
Yeah.
Right. As an animal, I stay away from things that cause me pain. Right. In one case, I've directly experienced pain as a result of an action I took. So I don't want that. And in another case, I imagine, because now I'm more sophisticated, how my action might cause pain, which I don't like, on another creature. So therefore, I probably don't want to do that, because that might end up causing pain to me too. Right. And so I could see how it's a development of that theme.
Yeah. It's hard to know. Some evidence, 20% in the direction for Logan Paul. But again, people typical to antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy, Suge Knight running over someone with his car because, he doesn't like him. Charles Manson sending people to kill other people. This is reckless disregard of the safety of self and others. So again, when people read this criterion, they're like, oh, clearly Logan Paul has disregard for the safety of self and others. And it's just like, you do not understand full-blown antisocial personality disorder.
Right.
Number 6, consistent irresponsibility. What do you think?
No, clearly not. Clearly not, because, again, you just can't keep an enterprise going for year after year after year.
Especially platform to platform. I mean, he started YouTube, went to Vine, goes back to YouTube. Now he's like Instagram, Twitter, clothing, do you know he makes movies? I didn't even talk about that. He makes full-blown
I know.
successful movies that he writes and acts.
Right.
And,
So by the way, as a counterexample, and I know these are controversial, right? But as a counterexample, a lot of people like myself might say that Trump is unsuccessful at a lot of things because of irresponsibility. And that is a pattern that he's bankrupted companies. He makes rash decisions, impulse decisions, those things. And so, with someone like Logan Paul or someone like Oprah or someone like this, where they've had a successful enterprise for year after year after year after year, you might claim they're narcissistic, you might claim a lot of things, but you can't claim that they're recklessly irresponsible.
Right. Just because, again, you look at Logan Paul and you look at his videos and you're just like, he looks like an irresponsible person.
Right.
That is a different adjective than the irresponsibility of antisocial personality disorder. Now, I will say that he did exhibit, again, 10, 20% of this when he released that Japan video, and then the rat video, and then the fish video, and the other things that he came out with. There was a string of, fairly he could have ruined his career during that time. He almost did. So you could say, 10, 20% in that direction. But again, the vast majority of his choices have been extremely responsible.
Right. Like if you claim MC Hammer was recklessly irresponsible. Like, okay, now we might start having a conversation because there's a guy who hit some amazing level of early success and then didn't pay taxes and blew all his money, right? Or something along those lines.
Yeah.
But in this case, how long has he been? Like you said, he started when he was 10 or something?
Yeah. I mean, he's been probably mammothly successul for like 5 years.
5 years, right?
Yeah. But it's hard to say because he could be just sort of lucky, like a lot of these questions about these criteria can really only be answered or will be more easily answered in 20 years, because if he has antisocial psychopathic personality disorder, he will shoot himself in the foot sufficiently where it'll be noticeable.
Yeah. Well, there's some cases like, how I think it's Khloe Kardashian or something is the first female billionaire of her age in the history of the world.
Wow.
And I might be getting the name wrong, but it's one of the Kardashians, like one of the young ones or something. And she's got, the reason she made all this money is because at one point, some entrepreneur in the clothing and fashion world or whatever was like, hey, if you put your name on this line of cosmetics and whatever they are, it'll make a ton of money. And so she did. And now she's got this global empire of cosmetics and probably fashion for girls and young women and stuff that makes her a billion, she's been a billionaire, right? So in that case, like, I don't know how responsible she is. I don't know how much she manages her own enterprise, whatever. How much was luck? I don't know, right? Like, it could be she's an amazing businesswoman. That's what it is. But in a case where someone like is constantly putting out a product and not defaulting on taxes and not wasting all their money and going bankrupt and all these kinds of things, like there's some modicum of responsibility you at least have to attribute to that.
Right. An example of further down the spectrum of irresponsible antisocial psychopathy is with, oh, hi, Mark.
Right.
What's his name again?
Yeah. The actor, right? Like the.
Yeah. Because especially when you read the story or watch the movie, Disaster Artist, he was extremely irresponsible with his money.
Right.
I mean, just like making, comically bad choices with his money. This is what antisocial people, again, shooting yourself in the foot.
What is his name?
God. Oh God, it's gonna kill us.
Is it a weird name?
No.
Is it a normal name?
He changed it. He changed his name because I think he's Polish officially. But anyway,
Gosh, that's
so people will, with antisocial and psychopathy, they tend to bounce from job to job. So they tend to not really have a very good career,
right?
Because of a lot of different things. Now, in the DSM, they'll just say they bounce from job to job. But when you look at personality, which the DSM doesn't really comment on, people with antisocial psychopathy, they tend to have higher levels of narcissism. And so they're just like, I'm above work. I don't want to go to work today, so I'm not going to do it. How many days does Logan Paul wake up in the day and just be like, you know what? I don't want to do a blog today. I don't want to make a video. Right. I'd rather do something else. Probably half the time he feels that way. So, but he pushes forward, then that may be part of his hardworking and maybe narcissism around that. Also, like I said before, people with antisocial psychopathy, they tend to be in deep despair and anger and which will cause them to be fired from a lot of jobs. Also, they lack a self. I've talked about self-development, and people with psychopathy, it's a cluster B, they lack a self, which means that they have a really hard time knowing what they want in life. And in order to have consistent goals...
Tommy Wiseau. In order to have a consistent behavioral pattern and build towards a career, you have to want something. And people who have psychopathy, antisocial, full-blown, they don't have a self. They don't know what they want. They don't really have a goal in life. They're just sort of bouncing from thing to thing. Okay. Number 7 is lack of remorse. Does he lack remorse, Berto? I do. So like I was saying earlier, I do think that first apology, the one that I saw a year ago, whatever it was, I don't really think, I think he was trying to like check the boxes. But again, he is young, like we said, and all these kinds of things. To some extent that we've seen, yes. But is it a permanent marker of his personality? Is it a phase of his life, etc.? Was he, and also, maybe he was really remorseful. He just didn't know how to show it. And
right. Yeah, I agree. I would, when I look back to when I was his age, there were things that I did that I look back and cringe at. I mean, going back even further,
totally.
Going back even further, when I was like, I don't know, 13, I would, you know, occasionally, it wasn't all the time, torment my younger brother.
Yeah.
There were a lot of times when
I would torment my younger brother all the time.
and when I think about some of the things I did to him,
right.
But it didn't occur to me until I was probably like 25. As 25, I started recalling these behaviors, and I felt so bad, you know, that I went to my younger brother. I was like, I'm so sorry. And, you know, I did that probably like 10 different times over the span of, 20 years or something. And every time my brother's like, don't worry about it. I barely remember it.
Right. So actually, sorry, it's funny you're bringing this up, because it's occurring to me that not only did I also torture my younger brother, but I've never apologized about it. In fact, we always laugh about it. And it is sort of funny, but there was an element of sadism to my behavior.
Yeah. So was I a psychopath? No, I was young and lacked that brain pattern, so is Logan Paul a psychopath, or is he young and immature? Right. We will wait to see, we'll find out. But again, full-blown psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, the lack of remorse, Charles Manson never had remorse for killing all those people during or after. Ted Bundy seemingly had no remorse for, and couldn't while he was doing all those horrible things, because otherwise he would have stopped himself.
All those guys in the interviews, Dahmer, Bundy and stuff, the most they ever exhibit is sort of a clinical, or clinical is the wrong word, sort of a technical level of understanding that what they did was societally wrong, and they kind of recognize that. And they'll say words like, if I could take it back, I would, blah, 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 blah. But it's clear that they can't feel it.
Right.
Yeah.
And a pattern of behavior that demonstrates a lack of remorse.
For example, there were in the Manson case of the women, I saw interviews with them, and there was one of them. Several of the other ones, it's clear they absolutely regretted and were remorseful of what they had done, right? There was one in particular that at the time when you saw interviews with her, she just seemed completely unfeeling. And even now when she's much older and still in jail, she only acts as if she has learned through all these years. And I feel like she must be on the spectrum of psychopathy. Interesting.
So to demonstrate the subtle differences between antisocial and psychopathy, so we just went through antisocial, the 7 criteria and talked about it. And again, conclusion, 10, 20% down the road. Now let's go through psychopathy, the 20 items. Glib and superficial charm.
Yes.
How so?
I think that's what he does for a living.
It's hard to know, though, because he certainly is irreverent. He certainly is silly.
Yeah.
Trying to be charming.
Yeah.
But again, this is where an assessment would have to come in, because is he super fit? Like when you're actually talking, if you were a friend of his,
right? Is he like that or not?
Yeah. Is he faking it all the time?
Right.
Or is he just being a goofball in the videos? That's a hard one to know, but certainly some evidence in that direction.
I'd say like I have in my life exhibited glib and superficial charm throughout my development.
Yeah. So it's the sort of thing where if you were a psychopath, having a YouTube channel like this would be easier for you in this way, because you wouldn't have to drum up silliness.
Right.
You were always drumming up something. Number 2, grandiose estimation of self. What do you think?
Yes, but again, that one's hard because I feel like any child star, at least 99% of them develop this because the world that they're exhibiting, that is being shown to them is, oh, wow, I do things and people by the millions love it. So I must be extra, extra special. I must be one of a kind. So how could you almost not have a grandiose sense of self?
Yeah, I can't imagine how much people like this get screwed up.
Like Justin Bieber, Michael Jackson, all these guys.
Especially someone like Justin Bieber who became a star very young.
At 11 or something.
Yeah. There is a very important stage of development where you have to learn you are not the fucking center of the universe.
Right.
You think you are and you feel like you are, but you learn through many instances that you are not as smart as you think you are. You're not as interesting as you think you are. You're not as good as you are a regular fucking human.
And case in point, when that does finally hit for a lot of these folk, it ends up being disastrous.
Right.
They commit suicide or they go on drugs or depression or all of the above, etc.
Yeah. Because, in normal development, you learn how to cope with that notion. You become like, well, I'm good most of the time, but, I'm not that great, Number 3, need for stimulation.
I would imagine that is quite high in his case.
Seemingly, yes. Seemingly, yes.
Yeah.
Number 4, pathological lying.
So that's the one where I don't know. I don't have any data that would show that.
Yeah, we don't have any data. There's no evidence. No. We'd have to ask people close to him, but it doesn't appear so. I would suspect if he did have this one full blown, again, think of the con artist that I talked about, that it would either become public or he would push people away because they'd be like, he's just a liar.
Right.
Number 5, cunning and manipulative. Cunning and manipulative. What do you think?
Yeah, again, is like without observing his day-to-day business dealings and actual interactions with people, not like off camera, that's kind of hard to know. And by the way, even on camera, I don't know that that's what he's known for.
Yeah. Right. He's pretty hard on his sleeve. I mean, there's some videos where he did manipulate, so to speak, pranks, like he called the cops on his brother and stuff and let that whole thing kind of play itself out.
I've seen channels where they were the more like the pickup artist type channels where I'm like, these guys are master manipulators.
Right. So that's when you actually see that kind of thing where it's like, you walk into a scenario and 100% of your intent and behavior is set on quote unquote manipulating another person. You're not actually interested in interacting or even having fun yourself.
Like the talented Mr. Ripley comes to mind. Right. Like he's always calculating how to manipulate and kind of game the situation so that.
Right. Yeah. And this is that lack of self.
Yeah.
If you had a self, you would say, well, what about me?
Right.
Why am I trying to manipulate everyone? What do I want?
Yeah.
How about I think I want to feel good about this interaction. Right. How about I talk about a story that I want to talk about? Why do I have to always be trying to manipulate other people? Number 6, lack of remorse or guilt.
Well, again, like I said, he's exhibited some of that in the fact that he didn't really fully apologize in the right ways and all these things. But the more we've talked through it, I don't have data that says like that's his lifelong pattern and he can't do it. And it sounds like he's grown over even just 2 years.
Right. Again, 10, 20% with the evidence we've talked about already, but full-blown Manson, Ted Bundy, these kinds of people. Now, having said that, I will point out that the vast majority of people with full-blown antisocial personality disorder or psychopathy are not murderers, by the way.
Right.
In fact, there's probably similar rates of murdering. I mean, there's plenty of people who murder who don't have antisocial or psychopathy. But I hope you realize that even the non-murdering types of cunning and manipulative people will be very noticeably manipulative, especially when you're on camera all day long,
But because they have the sort of the propensity for saying what they think the other person wants to hear. If the other person is not very aware, they could appear to probably apologize legitimately, you know?
Yeah, interesting. Again, I'll repeat the caveat before we wrap this up that I have no idea. I can't diagnose from afar, and we have extremely limited data before us. Number 7, shallow affect. Superficial emotional responsiveness.
Yeah, and so again, yes, I think he's exhibited that. I think a lot of young people have shallow affect, but I don't know to what extent this. I mean, like, would his family members agree? Would his friends agree? That's
right. And while we're on the topic of family, his brother and his dad, all three of them appear to have, 10, 20% psychopathy. It's hard to say, of course, because we're just looking at YouTube videos, but they all seem to have a similar ability to break norms and to not worry about consequences and to be dangerous. And
I see.
Like Jake Paul, for example, with the controversy with him bothering his neighbors.
Yeah.
Like, that's a hard thing to do, even when I was young, even when I was 20 years old. Although I'll tell a story along these lines. One of my favorite parties I'd ever thrown or been at was a party I had when I lived on Green Lake, near Green Lake, and summertime, hot August, Seattle evening, and we had a couple kegs and house party, and all our friends came, and we have a front lawn and a back lawn, and then eventually me and Chris Huber and Alex Glover, we decide, because we were in a band at the time, we're going to play a show.
Yeah.
But it was so hot on the inside, we decided we're going to set up in the backyard. So we're in a suburban neighborhood, and it's like 11:30 at night, and we're playing loud,
right,
rock, Smashing Pumpkins style kind of rock, and complete disregard for the neighbors.
Right.
And eventually a neighbor came by and said, like, hey, it's late and you're playing loud music in your backyard. You're probably bothering people for miles.
Yeah.
Like, stop it. And I remember at the time just being like, oh, he's an old fuddy-duddy.
Yeah.
Like, okay, fine. And
Who needs to sleep?
Yeah. Now, or even just maybe 2 years later.
Yeah.
You wouldn't catch me dead doing something,
No, I can totally relate to this, because when I was in high school, I was always horrified by people that would TP other people's houses. I never did it.
That was another thing me and my friends did.
When I ever heard of it, I always was so upset. It luckily never happened to me, but I always felt that if it did, I would go insane. Like, how dare you? And for some reason, I held that sacred. First of all, I had never heard of that in Colombia, right? That was not a thing. And so then when I heard, like, you what? And then that would be so hard to clean. How disrespectful, all these things.
That's the point.
But then I go to college, and as far as noise is concerned, I don't give a crap. I'm sitting there playing in my dorm. People are coming like, dude, come on. And I'm like, what? And then I go and rent the house with my buddies, and we're playing. It's like the neighbor comes. I'm like, oh, this jerk. How am I empathetic on the one hand and totally unempathetic on the other hand?
Yeah. So now one could argue that maybe now actually we probably have, some psychopathy too,
Sure.
The ability for us to be podcasters, it's kind of breaking some rules, you know what I mean? Like, especially some of the things that we say, it might bother some people. Also, it's a studied fact that therapists and psychologists have a higher rate of psychopathy, of being on the scale, not of having the full-blown disorder, but being on the scale. Because to be a therapist, you kind of have to be able to break social norms. When I ask someone how their sex life is going in my session,
right,
or how they, how do they really feel, you're sort of breaking some social norms. And so if you have difficulty with that, you might not be attracted to that profession, Yeah. So the point of bringing these stories up is, like, we don't really know if Logan Paul actually is callous and lacks empathy. He could be young and exhibiting some minor traits, or will learn at the age of 35 that, that 20% extended into that time. Yeah. But again, full-blown psychopaths will harm other people and just, they do not care. And so,
and it's not that and this is the part that's so hard to understand, that it took me a long time to get, because when I was younger, I sort of thought I was a little like a psychopath, because in my mind, what made me a little bit that way is that I was able to do things like watch a horror movie and not care much about it being horrific. What I didn't get is that the true psychopath, when they're doing the thing, it's not that they have the little inner conversation and they convince themselves, they decide they're not going to care. Is that they literally never had that conversation.
Right.
So they're sitting there and they're like taking the money that from the till, and they see the person clearly, they're minimum wage, and they might even be pregnant. They don't have the, I wonder if I shouldn't, because maybe they won't. That conversation never happened. They literally just go, this is for me.
Yeah.
And that is a very important distinction, that a lot of us that don't have those full-blown traits, we will have those inner conversations. And so even though sometimes we might end up being too callous, we had the conversation.
Right, exactly. That's a good distinction.
Yeah.
And this is why a lot of them will shoot themselves in the foot, because it's almost like a disability.
Yeah.
So they'll be looking at the till,
yeah,
and they'll be like, I take.
Yeah.
And then, but they're on camera,
yeah,
taking the
right,
money.
Right.
Because they don't think these things through.
Right.
I take.
Yeah.
For someone who has empathy, who steals, because there's plenty of people who have empathy and steal, right, they'll look at it and they're probably better at thieving, because they're like, ooh, someone's going to be upset about this. Maybe someone even has a camera to catch people like this. Yeah. Maybe I should take it when the lights are off. There's, anyway.
Well, and even in the extreme example, because I think, and we've talked about this before, someone like Ted Bundy gives this impression to most of us that, oh yeah, psychopaths, these genius level, because it happened to be that this one psychopath, Ted Bundy, it was an example of a crossover of, like, clearly he was a smart dude.
Yeah.
But clearly not able to stop his stupid impulses.
Right.
So even though he was clearly higher on the IQ scale, he still ended up being reckless.
Yeah, it's kind of random that he wasn't caught. I mean, a number of his initial crimes that I know of were done kind of like in broad daylight.
Yeah.
And one, sort of random luck thing could have happened, and his spree could have ended after one crime. Number 9, parasitic lifestyle.
Right.
Is he a parasite?
I mean, no indication of that. He seems like his own generator.
Right. If anything, he has a bunch of parasites around him.
Around.
10, poor behavioral controls.
I mean, again, I know just as many people that I grew up with that are as reckless in that sense, or behavioral control deficient. But so when this podcast started, if you had asked me, I would say, like, yeah, absolutely. But now I'm realizing, like, yeah, he's 21 when a lot of this stuff is happening. So sure, to some extent, but I don't know that it's a huge problem.
Yeah. Again, as with a lot of these other things, it's like, well, maybe 10, 20%, which he uses to his advantage, but ends up biting him in the ass sometimes with the rat thing and the other stuff. But he doesn't have it full blown, because if he had it full blown, he would be punching people on camera. Yeah. He would be harming his fans. There'd be all these sort of, again, shooting himself in the foot kind of behavior. It's
like when you see more of, I hate to bring the Michael Jackson example, but like when you see Michael Jackson's behavior, and I'm not categorizing this as that, but I'm saying he clearly ended up making a lot of very odd decisions, and like holding his baby outside of the window and all these kind of crazy, like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Why are you inviting kids to, like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Right. In this case, we don't have years and years and years of continuous, constant examples of, like, oh my gosh, and you keep screwing up, and you keep screwing up, or you keep doing weird, random things. And,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like a poor behavioral control when he did the boxing match, for example, would have been like, at the end of the match, he says something really regrettable.
Yeah.
Or like Kanye, for example, has very poor behavioral control.
Great example.
Yeah.
great example where for the first few years of him doing these things, a lot of us, including myself, were like, I guess he's just sort of smart marketer. And then a couple more years go by, and you're like, wait a minute. Now he's just shooting himself in the foot. Then a couple more years go by, you're like, what the hell is this problem?
Yeah.
And by now it's like joke. Like actually it feels sad. You're like, he's got a problem. Like,
yeah. And it's a clear pattern. Like the first time he jumps up on stage with Taylor Swift,
right.
You're like, oh yeah, it's cool. Like he's sticking it to the man and, he's speaking truth to power. The next time he jumps on stage, at the end of, in the fast forward to all the other things he's done, like he's at concerts, he's had like hour-long rants.
Yeah.
At the end of Saturday Night Live this last year, or 2 years ago or whatever, he off camera went on this long rant and like ruined everyone's night with like, make America great again and just ranting. And it's like, no one appreciates what he's saying.
And the videos of his concerts where he's like railroaded his own concert in the middle of it.
Yeah.
And ended the concert, like weird stuff.
And it now maybe we should do a whole episode on Kanye at some point, because I actually haven't looked into figuring out what's up with him.
But that's not what we're talking about.
Yeah, I don't think he's psychopathic. I think he more suffers from a mood issue.
Well, and anyways, I don't want to go down that path. But our point here, I think, is we don't have those examples. Like what you were saying, like, oh, and then he did an episode where he tastes dead rat. I'm like, that's the worst next level example that we...
Yeah, exactly. It's like he didn't go to another suicide forest,
Double down.
Yeah.
Or even worse, because like, even in these cases, it's like, because I think when we're trying to see examples of...
Which old people, meaning anyone over 20 years old, are clearly doing with him.
Right. I think what we want to see examples of are things like this. When the first thing comes out, the video comes out and everyone gets upset, he immediately goes on 2 days of Twitter rants insulting everyone who's insulting him. Then he shuts out for a month, and then he comes back a month later insulting everyone else, and then he puts out an even more insulting video, just to, like stuff like that, you know. And then he loses like half his audience, and he like weird shit like this.
Yeah, I have no doubt that in the past year he has had impulses to tweet stuff like this.
Yeah.
And maybe he has, because I didn't do a full deep dive into everything he's done. But I don't think he has to the extent that would meet this criterion. Right. I'm sure he's had impulses of just like, hey world, fuck off. Like, I made a dumb video. Enough is enough. Like, any rational person would have that. So I can relate on like a 0.1% basis. Sure. There are times I had a gaffe a couple years ago where I made an episode that, bothered people that in a way that I would not like to bother people. When I say I'm a feminist and I bother anti-feminist people, I don't mind bothering those people. Yeah. But when this episode that I made, I won't go into details, but it was my, Japan video essentially. And
I think I know what you're talking about.
There were moments, and still to this day, where part of me wants to be like, hey, like, lay off me. Sure. Like, you don't understand what I was trying to say, or like, you're too sensitive, or something horrible back. I have the impulse, but I restrain myself because, one, the gestalt of my reaction is one of empathy and apology, and of humility. Really, that's the main thing. It's just like, even if I don't get it, I respect them enough to say like, well, I must have done something wrong because I respect their opinion of my behavior, and therefore I must have done something really bad. I can't absolutely relate to it, but I'm going to take their word for it, So, and Logan Paul also probably had lots of moments like that, but didn't act on that. That is behavioral control.
Well, Kirk, you can, I'm sure, notice this, that when we first started the show a decade ago, right? A lot of my shtick, and in fact, it was a lot of my personality, but a lot of my shtick was to try to be offensive, or try to say really unexpected pushy button type of things.
That's interesting. I don't think I've ever heard you admit that before.
Well, fair enough.
Or even frame it. I didn't know you framed it that way.
Well, I wouldn't have, because what used to happen is, like, if rewind the clock and don't even put me in the context of the podcast. Let's just go downtown to the W when one of our friends is DJing and I've had a few drinks in me and I'm talking to someone I just met and I say something extremely like either sexualized or offensive in some way or whatever. And you ask me, why did you just say that? I would say like, I don't know. I just tell it how it is. So
did that happen?
Well, I would say I would be because part of my
would Mitch say that to you?
Social no,
oh.
Because it was also a different time, right?
Yeah.
But part of my social shtick it wasn't always this way. I used to actually not be like that when I was more like, because when I was younger, I was actually always trying to be a really good Christian kid and so whatever. But as I became more worldly or whatever, part of my social shtick became...
Yeah, it was sort of, the way I saw it was sort of a litmus test that that you would impose on other people, which was...
Can you handle me?
Right. Let's figure this out now.
Yes.
I'm going to blast something in your face. And if you run away, then I'll know. Then I'll know, I'll know you and this will not have worked. But if this works, you'll actually love me more because I am the sort of person who blasts me and you can blast me back and this will be fun.
And that's actually absolutely right. And so to some extent, I sort of defend
Can you give an example of what you want to said?
Yeah. So it might have been like this. I just met a gal and her boyfriend or something like that. And we're talking.
Oh, God.
And I say like, oh, how long have you guys been together? And it's like, oh, a couple months. And I'm like, so you guys gone anal yet? Right? And then like the average person would be like, who the hell are you? Like we just met.
I don't know. I mean, right? I don't know average, but some for sure. Yeah.
Some. But
because actually I've find that people, especially in a context like that, you're at a club, are potentially going to really be attracted to something.
Well,
like
and
that.
that's why I would do it.
At least initially.
That's why I would do it because
but some people won't.
The narcissistic, slightly psychopathic part of me would relish on the reaction. Like, oh, are you going to be offended? Ha, I got you then, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
right. Most people would be like, even if that's a good tactic socially, so to speak, you couldn't get me to say that's too hard for me to blurt out, I'd worry too much about the consequences.
Well, and actually, ironically, through the podcast, what I've come to realize is like, man, the things we say to people have an effect on them. So you might be trying to be cool or whatever you think you're doing. You might re-traumatize someone. You might trigger them in a weird way. And ultimately, you're really only doing it selfishly for your own enjoyment right that moment. Why not take a more measured approach? You don't have to be at 110% at all times, right? Like that kind of thing. But when the podcast started, I would throw out like, to this day, I do it, but I do it with things that are a little more like, for example, when you bring up things that is something about evolution or whatever it is, and I disagree with, or philosophy or something, my inner voice says, don't just let this lie, challenge him on it, have the debate. And to me, that actually works in the podcast because we have a lively debate and I make my points, you make my points. But it used to be...
I make good points, you make...
I make bad, right.
Just kidding.
Right. But it used to be more like this.
To be clear, you make a lot of good points.
I know you're kidding.
Probably most of the listeners agree with you more than me.
But to be clear, you think that's because you're the genius.
No.
No, just kidding. No. But listen, we're getting off topic. The point is that there were these guests, and I felt like a lot of my role was to do that blast in their face to make the podcast more entertaining.
Right. My observation was rewind the tape 10 years or even 5 years.
Yeah.
It was kind of episode by episode. So sometimes you would sit down and I would, maybe it's attributed to this maturity aspect, but I also think it was you trying to find your place in the podcast.
Sure, absolutely.
And I think in, earlier episodes, you would be in this mode of just like, well, I need to contribute something.
Yep.
And I really know how to blurt out sexual innuendos and random things.
Or randomly like offensive or borderline offensive things.
And so that's what I'm going to do. That's my thing. And that's the neurons that I'm firing right now. And
it's kind of like the hey, if your IQ is not high enough to see that I'm just kidding, or that these are just words coming out of my mouth, so why are you being offended, right? Like there was a little bit of that egoism there. Like come on, man, catch up.
Right. So, and over time, over the past 5 years, you have, swerved away from that most of the time. You still do it sometimes.
I do.
But I don't think it's bad. I think, in fact, the survey that we sent out to everyone, most people love you and love that and think you're hilarious. So I would, encourage you to do whatever you're doing is working for most people.
There is this difference in that the way I do it nowadays, mostly, is that, first of all, I'm trying to, when we're having a serious discussion, I'm trying to keep it serious.
Yeah.
And then
in the past, I don't think you had that wherewithal.
Not as nuanced.
Yeah.
Now, I do try to find moments where actually, even when you are saying something scientific or whatever, if I find the right moment, I'll add a bit of humor. I'll say some reference or something. Okay.
So I would attribute part of this progression is you've become better at podcasting.
Sure.
And perhaps our chemistry has improved so that you will contribute. Your brain now is mostly in the same zone that my brain is. Because during certain episodes 5 years ago, my brain was in a state of trying to explain something or provide interesting content, blah, blah, blah. And you were at times, not all the time, in this jokey form for the entire episode. And sometimes I would get kind of annoyed with it because it'd be hard to have a conversation. In the past few years, I would say most of the time you're in the same mode that I'm in, if not all the time. Really.
In the early years, there were quite often where you would have to get me back on track, or let's just stop this one, and I guess the whole reason I'm bringing this up is because when we started the podcast, I was already 30.
Right.
Not 21.
Right.
So that's just to put in context. Like I had already had a whole bunch of growing and learning, all this stuff.
You weren't 30, you were 33 or 4.
Well, yeah, even more so, right? Yeah. So the point is that when we started the podcast, I was already I was like at least a decade ahead of this guy.
Right. And so what some people don't understand is that they will look at Logan Paul and say, well, he's 22, 23, he's a man.
Yeah.
But it's not like you go from child to man, overnight. Like you just flip this switch. What we're demonstrating with lots of anecdotes from our own life, which I hope people trust that Humberto and I in our 40s right now have tremendous empathy, in some ways too much empathy at times. I mean, you and I have tremendous empathy for other people, the world.
Yeah, my one flaw is that I'm too empathetic.
Well, I mean, you make a joke because of I think you identify as someone who isn't, but I know you as someone.
No. I'm kidding. My joke is that I'm being so narcissistic that I only have one flaw, and that it's that I care too, or I'm too concerned about other people.
No, and I think it's a product of age and experience and wisdom that produces more ability to be in other people's shoes,
right.
Learning and listening more and something that, is a product of maturity. And so saying these things, when we're younger, I hope demonstrates that maturity isn't, we tend to think of it's like, well, you're 19, you're mature now.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm guessing in 10, 20 years, I'll have even more empathy and more wisdom and more experience. And I'll look back at some of my behavior at the age of 49 now. Or wait, how old am I? 48. I'm at the age where I forget how old I am.
I think it's actually going to start going down the other way, where now you're really telling kids to get off your lawn.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if they're on my lawn, they should
get off.
It's my lawn. They should get up. Number 11, sexual promiscuity.
I have no idea.
Yeah, we have no idea. Hard to say. And even if he was, it'd be hard.
He's a successful 21-year-old, good-looking.
Yeah.
But come on.
Yeah, that wouldn't be hard to.
Like every Olympic athlete is sexually promiscuous.
Right. But when you look at antisocial psychopathic people, they will have a lot of indiscriminate, almost again shooting yourself in the foot promiscuity. I see. Because they again lack the empathy or the long-term planning that involves like, well, maybe I shouldn't cheat on that person because it'll hurt their feelings. Number 12, early behavioral problems.
I don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. I couldn't find actually anything about any detail about his childhood or his parents' personalities. There wasn't any evidence, but who knows? 13, lack of realistic long-term goals.
I mean, come on. Like, that's the kind of thing where you would say, like, what, do you think you're going to be making money at this YouTube business?
Yeah.
Yep.
I would say, again, there's no evidence of this one. Even while he was famous on Vine and on YouTube and Twitter and stuff, he actually did start college.
Yeah.
And was planning on having a regular career.
Well, and you've mentioned he's got multiple businesses now, not just the channel.
And halfway through university, he's like, actually, I think I'm going to go full time into this kind of stuff. And so I would say there's really no evidence of a lack of realistic long-term goals. 14, impulsivity. We've already talked about that one. 15, irresponsibility. We've talked about that one. 16, failure to accept responsibility for own actions. We've already talked about that one. 17, many short-term marital relationships. There's not enough time for that one. 18, juvenile delinquency, meaning, getting in a lot of trouble when you're a teen.
Clearly not enough because he's famous enough to where like that wouldn't have been a secret.
Hard to know, but no evidence.
Yeah.
He's white and blonde and blue-eyed, so, because that's actually one of the things that we haven't talked about is like, let's say he's black or Middle Eastern.
Sure.
And doing all these things, jumping on top of TV vans, driving around, harassing people, going to Japan, harassing people. Like, I just have to imagine that his, the stereotypes associated with a blonde kid from Ohio with pale skin somehow makes it more funny and more swallowable. And then I started thinking, well, PewDiePie is pretty white too.
Oh yeah. The top one's Shane Dawson.
Yeah.
It's also.
Yeah. So it's just like, that's interesting,
By the way, it was Ray something. Ray Johnson.
Well, wasn't
Something
it
like
an Italian name? Anyway, 19, revocation of conditional release. So this is jail talk because a lot of psychopathy scales are given to people in criminal. It's just we don't know. And 20, criminal versatility, meaning that they commit lots of different crimes: stealing a car, holding up a bank, shoplifting, beating someone up.
I wonder if we could do an episode at some point about how, like the prevalence of psychopathy among criminal enterprises, like the mafia or narco gangs and things like that, because so many of these seem to apply in those cases. But
yeah, it's interesting. I'm sure they were attracted to it, but at the same time, it's a context. If you're in the mob, there's a system and there are rules. It's modern day. It would be like a drug dealer who commits crimes. It's a context that those are the rules. Yeah. If you live in that world, those are the rules. All right, let's conclude with a little talk about sociopathy. So in 90% of the people on the internet are like, Logan Paul is a sociopath.
Right.
And there's this, or other people are sociopaths. And I just want to say to everybody, sociopathy or sociopath is not a clinical term.
Right. Because a lot of times they'll say, which I used to misunderstand as well. They'll say, no, I'm not saying he's a psychopath. I'm saying he's a sociopath.
Right. People colloquially or commonly think of sociopathy as light psychopathy, which is not clinically correct.
Well, and more specifically, because I know I used to misunderstand this as well, is I think a lot of people think of it like, no, a psychopath, I get it. He doesn't murder people. I'm saying sociopath.
Right. Now, I will say that some, very few researchers and authors actually do hold that point of view. They will say that sociopathy is a broader category and psychopathy is like the worst sociopaths. And some people will say like, well, sociopathy is learned psychopathy because of the world you grow up in a war context or something. Then you learned your psychopathy. But in my world, in the real clinical world and in the research world, people don't use the term sociopathy. They don't use sociopath because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. We already have antisocial personality disorder. Right. We already have psychopathy, which actually psychopathy isn't even in the DSM. It's antisocial personality disorder. So really, most people use antisocial personality disorder. I like the term psychopathy because as you can tell, we just went through, there's slight differences, or maybe a more elaboration in the psychopathy criteria.
Well, and I really like what makes more sense to me, mathematically maybe, is how we've talked about in the past where you can have psychopathic traits and also have sadism and also have necrophilia or have whatever.
And narcissism.
Like, as opposed to, I think more traditionally, it's this very simplistic. A psychopath is this kind of very smart, savvy, murdering cannibal type person.
Yeah.
And I think there's a sociopath thing, which is kind of like that, but not quite as extreme. They don't kill probably, or maybe they kill only a little bit.
Yeah. The vast majority of people who suffer from psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder do not kill anybody.
Right.
They have the normal curve of IQ. They might even be slightly lower IQ. I would speculate. I don't have data on that, but if in all likelihood, their IQ has the normal range, which means that most of them are around 100 IQ, which is actually not that intelligent.
Is IQ influenced by learning after a certain age?
Yeah.
So it could be quite possible that someone that's got more developmental difficulties won't learn as much, and therefore their IQ won't keep growing.
Right. So if you have psychopathy, in all likelihood, you had the precursors to it early in life, which creates difficulties for you in life. Yeah. And you probably were traumatized, which adds its own difficulties, which means that at school, you're going to not do as well. So absolutely. So you have antisocial personality disorder, which is mainly a behavioral description because the DSM likes to stick to science and observation. So they mainly stick to behaviors that you can observe. Mm-hmm. And sociopathy is not in the DSM, so it's freer and it gets kind of into some personality talk. And so so I tend to like psychopathy for that reason. But yeah, so I hope that this episode illuminates the real clinical picture regarding psychopathy and antisocial personality disorder and how the internet is vastly wrong. I in all my browsing, I was trying to find some clinician who would come forward and say like, hey, enough with diagnosing Logan Paul with sociopathy. One, that's not a thing that people use anymore. So I don't know what the hell the internet is talking about. Two, real psychopaths and real antisocial personality
these other traits.
have a consistent, pervasive pattern that leads to this kind of life that Logan Paul is not exhibiting.
Yeah, we don't have that evidence.
Now, maybe he will in the future, and maybe we're not hearing a lot, which absolutely could be true. One of his friends could come forward and say like, look, you do not know the real Logan Paul. Let me tell you something. Right. And I'd be like, okay, new data. I didn't have access to that before. Let's add that to the picture. I don't know. But from what I can glean through my pinhole through the fence, looking at at the other side of the fence, trying to evaluate someone's personality, which is, irresponsible on some level and unethical on some level. I believe his account that he has some traits psychopathy. He said sociopathy because he's making the same mistake, but of psychopathic and antisocial personality disorder. What's the final word, Berto?
Well, I have learned something again. I hate it when that happens. I think I started the episode with a really negative, ill-informed perception about this young man. And the thing is, I think I did because I was so... the only data that I had was like he was so offensive in Japan and he did this offensive thing. So I'm not excusing that behavior at all. I'm not excusing any of that offensive behavior. I'm just realizing that I need to maybe rethink the level of hatred or dislike that I implicitly have for the dude because I don't really know much about him.
Well, that's another thing that we didn't talk about is ageism.
Yeah.
You know, it's like young people are dumb and his audience is dumb and worthy of disdain and disregard.
Yeah, right.
All right, well, that does it for that episode of Psychology in Seattle. Thanks for joining us out there. Please take care of yourself because
you deserve it.